I was sitting in my quiet kitchen in Oregon when my father's call came through. His voice was cold, businesslike, the tone he used when closing a deal he didn't want to negotiate. "Margaret, we've decided it's best if you don't attend Emily's wedding. It's going to be intimate and, well, your sister wants everything to be perfect." Perfect. That word hung in the air like poison. I'd just wired $50,000 for the venue. I'd covered the caterer, the flowers, the photographer, everything my perfect little sister needed for her fairy tale day. And now I wasn't even invited. But here's what they didn't know: the call didn't fully disconnect. I could still hear them. Emily's voice came through crystal clear. "I don't want her ruining the photos. She always looks so plain." My father laughed. My mother said nothing. 58 years. 58 years I'd been invisible, taken for granted, erased. The spinster sister, the caretaker, the checkbook. Not anymore. I opened my banking app, finger hovering over that $50,000 pending transaction. One tap. That's all it would take. So I tapped it. Reversed. Canceled. Done. Then I changed the beneficiary to my own name. The silence that followed was beautiful, because within 30 minutes my phone exploded with 110 missed calls. But I didn't answer. Instead, I opened an email I'd never seen before, sent from my late mother 3 years ago, with instructions to deliver it only when they betray you completely. Inside was a safety deposit box number and a note that said, "They think you have nothing. Show them what power really looks like." What I found in that box changed everything. And what I did next, they never saw coming. Stay with me, because this is the story of how the invisible daughter became absolutely unforgettable. My name is Margaret Reynolds, though everyone's always called me Maggie, and at 58 years old, I've become exactly what I never wanted to be: invisible. I spent the last 3 decades as the family caretaker, the one who put her own life on hold so everyone else could shine. Now I live alone in a small house on the outskirts of Eugene, Oregon, where the quiet has become so familiar it feels like another piece of furniture. The call came on a Thursday evening just as the autumn light was fading through my kitchen window. I was making tea, the same chamomile blend I'd been drinking for 20 years, when my phone lit up with "Dad" on the screen. My heart did that stupid, hopeful little jump it always does when family calls, even though I should know better by now. "Margaret." His voice had that clipped, businesslike quality he uses when he's already made up his mind about something. No "Hi, sweetheart," or "How are you doing?" Just my full name spoken like a line item on a spreadsheet. "Hi, Dad," I said, setting down my mug carefully. "Is everything okay?" There was a pause, the kind that makes your stomach drop. "Your mother and I have been discussing the wedding arrangements. We've decided it would be best if you didn't attend Emily's ceremony." The words didn't make sense at first, like he was speaking a language I'd forgotten how to understand. "I'm sorry, what?" "It's going to be a small, intimate affair," he continued, his tone never wavering from that cool, detached register. "Emily wants to keep it very select. Family and close friends only." "But I am family," I heard myself say, hating how small my voice sounded. "I'm her sister." "It's complicated, Margaret." He sighed like I was being deliberately difficult. "Emily wants everything to be perfect, and she feels that a smaller guest list will help achieve that vision. Surely you understand." I heard my mother's voice in the background, soft and agreeable, saying something I couldn't quite make out. After 40 years of marriage, she'd perfected the art of supporting Dad without ever actually having to voice an opinion herself. "I've already paid for the venue," I said quietly. $50,000, Dad. The deposit and the final payment. I wired it last month." "Yes, and we're very grateful for your contribution." His voice warmed slightly, the way it always did when discussing money. "That's very generous of you, and of course, Emily appreciates it tremendously. This isn't about the finances, Margaret. It's about keeping the day manageable." The conversation ended quickly after that. He had a dinner reservation to get to, he said. Mom sent her love. Emily would call me next week to explain properly. The line went dead, and I stood there in my kitchen phone still pressed to my ear, feeling like someone had just pushed me off a cliff and I was still waiting to hit the ground. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation I'd had with Emily over the past 6 months. All those calls where I'd listened to her agonize over color schemes and seating charts, where I'd offered advice she never took, and support she never acknowledged. I thought about the weekend I'd spent helping her choose her dress sitting in that boutique while she modeled gown after gown asking my opinion and then immediately dismissing it. "You wouldn't understand Maggie," she'd said with that indulgent smile. "You've never been married." Around 2 a.m, I picked up my phone to check the time. That's when I noticed something strange. The call log showed that Dad's call had lasted not the 3 minutes I remembered, but nearly 25 minutes. I frowned at the screen, confused. We'd definitely hung up. Hadn't we? I pressed the phone to my ear, and my blood turned to ice. They were still talking. "Much easier this way," Dad was saying. "Margaret won't make a scene. She never does." "I still feel bad about it, John." That was Mom, her voice carrying that martyred quality she'd perfected over the years. "She did pay for the venue." "She can afford it?" Dad's tone was dismissive. "What else is she going to spend her money on? She has no life." Then Emily's voice bright and careless. "Honestly, I'm relieved. I don't want her ruining the wedding photos. She always looks so plain. And you know Derek's family is very image conscious. His mother specifically asked me who would be in the family portraits." My father laughed. Actually laughed. "Well, we can't have Margaret's librarian cardigans in the society pages, can we?" "John, that's cruel," Mom said, but there was no real conviction in her voice, just that same passive, enabling tone she'd used my entire life. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. 58 years. 58 years of being the good daughter, the responsible one, the sister who showed up, who helped, who gave and gave and gave. And this was what they really thought of me. Not even worth a seat at the wedding I'd funded. Too plain, too embarrassing, too much of a liability for the perfect images they wanted to project. I opened my banking app with trembling fingers. There it was, glowing on my screen, the $50,000 payment to elite events and venues scheduled to process tomorrow morning. Final payment for the Reynolds-Matthews wedding. The wedding I wasn't invited to attend. Something cold and clear settled over me like ice water flooding my veins. I'd spent my whole life being reasonable, being understanding, putting everyone else first. I'd cared for Mom during her cancer treatments while Emily posted photos from her semester abroad in Paris. I'd taken over managing the family finances when Dad's investments went south, quietly fixing his mistakes without ever asking for recognition. I'd been the invisible scaffolding holding this family upright, and they'd never even noticed I was there. Not anymore. My finger hovered over the reverse transaction button. For one long moment, I hesitated, some deeply ingrained part of me still whispering that good daughters don't make waves, that family loyalty means swallowing your hurt and pretending everything's fine. Then I remembered Emily's laugh. She always looks so plain. I smiled cold and sharp and pressed the button. Transaction reversed. $50,000 returned to my account. But I wasn't finished. With a few more taps, I changed the beneficiary designation on the payment record from Reynolds Family Wedding Fund to Margaret E. Reynolds' personal account. Then I set my phone down, made myself a fresh cup of tea, and waited for morning. I woke up Friday morning to the sound of my phone vibrating so violently it had walked itself halfway across my nightstand. The screen was lit up like a Christmas tree, 17 missed calls. 12 from Emily, 3 from Dad, 2 from Mom. I stared at the notifications for a long moment, then reached over and switched the phone to silent before setting it face down on the bed. The autumn sun was streaming through my bedroom window, catching dust motes in the air. Everything looked exactly the same as it had yesterday morning. Same faded quilt, same stack of library books on my dresser, Same watercolor painting of the Oregon coast that Mom had given me 20 years ago. But something fundamental had shifted. I could feel it in my bones, a strange lightness I hadn't experienced in decades. I took my time getting dressed, choosing comfortable jeans and a soft gray sweater. The kind of clothes Emily would probably call frumpy. I smiled at that thought as I padded down the hallway to my kitchen, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floors. The wedding invitation was still sitting on my kitchen table where I'd left it 2 weeks ago. I picked it up now, really looking at it for the first time. Heavy cardstock, the expensive kind with that subtle texture. Elegant script announcing the marriage of Emily Christine Reynolds to Derek Alexander Matthews. And there at the bottom in smaller print, from the Reynolds family. No mention of who specifically was hosting. No, Margaret and John Reynolds cordially invite you, like traditional invitations usually say. Just the collective anonymous family, as if we were some faceless corporate entity rather than actual people with names and histories. I'd been erased before the ceremony even happened. I made coffee in my old percolator, the one Mom had used every morning of my childhood. The familiar burbling sound filled the kitchen as I sat down at the table, invitation still in my hand. My phone was buzzing again from the bedroom, a distant angry hornet. Let them panic. Let them wonder. For once in my life, I wasn't rushing to smooth things over, to fix the problem, to make everything comfortable for everyone else. The coffee was just finishing when my laptop chimed with an incoming email notification. I almost ignored it, probably another desperate message from Emily. But something made me look. The sender address was unfamiliar, rmitchell@hargravemitchellaw.com. The subject line made my hand freeze halfway to my coffee mug. Per instructions from Elizabeth Reynolds, deceased. My mother had been dead for 3 years. I clicked the email open with shaking fingers. The message was formal, written in that careful legal language that sounds like English but feels like a foreign tongue. Dear Ms. Margaret Reynolds, this correspondence has been generated by our automated monitoring service in accordance with instructions left by your late mother, Elizabeth Ann Reynolds. Mrs. Reynolds established a conditional notification system in June 2019, programmed to activate when certain specified triggering events were detected. Our service has identified that you were removed from the guest registry for Emily Reynolds' wedding on October 10th. This removal met the criteria Mrs. Reynolds anticipated when she set up this safeguard. Pursuant to her wishes, we are now authorized to inform you of assets held in trust for your benefit. I had to read it 3 times before the words started to make sense. Mom had set this up 3 years ago when she was already sick, already knowing she wouldn't be here to protect me. She'd been planning for this exact moment. The email continued with practical details. There was a safety deposit box at First National Bank in downtown Portland, registered under a trust with my name as the sole beneficiary. The access code was my birth date. The email ended with an address, a contact number for the law firm, and one final line that made my eyes blur with tears. Your mother wanted you to know she always knew. She always knew. Knew what? That they'd do this to me, that Dad and Emily would eventually push me out completely, that I'd spend my whole life giving everything and receiving nothing but contempt in return. I sat back in my chair, coffee forgotten as memories flooded back. Mom's last 2 years when the cancer had spread and the treatments had made her so weak, she could barely lift her head. I'd been there for everything. Every doctor's appointment, every chemo session, every terrifying middle-of-the-night emergency. I'd learned how to change wound dressings, how to administer medications through her port, how to help her to the bathroom when she was too weak to walk on her own. Emily had visited twice. Once for Thanksgiving, where she'd spent most of the day on her phone posting carefully curated photos of family time that made it look like a Hallmark movie. And once, right at the end, flying in dramatically the day before Mom died so she could play the grieving daughter for Dad's business associates at the funeral. But it was those long, quiet hours in the hospital that came back to me now. Mom's hand in mine, thin and papery, her grip surprisingly strong despite everything the cancer had taken from her. She'd look at me with those clear blue eyes and say things that seemed like the morphine talking. "You're the strong one, Maggie. You've always been the strong one." I'd squeeze her hand and tell her to rest to save her strength. "But strong doesn't mean you should suffer," she'd whisper. "Promise me you won't let them make you small." I'd promise the way you promise dying people anything they need to hear. I never imagined she was trying to tell me something specific, trying to prepare me for this exact moment. Now she was reaching out from beyond the grave, and the message was clear. She'd known. She'd watched them diminish me for decades, watched me sacrifice and serve and disappear a little more each year. And she'd done something about it, something she couldn't do while Dad was still around to control the narrative. I pulled up the First National Bank website and clicked on the appointment scheduler. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, the earliest slot available. I entered my information with steady hands, feeling that strange calm settling over me again. My phone was still buzzing in the bedroom. 18 missed calls now, probably. Maybe 20. I didn't care. For the first time in 58 years, I was going to find out what it felt like to put myself first. I spent the rest of Friday afternoon in a strange state of suspended animation, moving through my house like a ghost in my own life. The missed calls had climbed past 30 by noon, but I'd stopped checking. Instead, I found myself doing mundane things with unusual focus, reorganizing my spice cabinet, deadheading the chrysanthemums in my front garden, folding laundry with precise hospital corners, the way Mom had taught me when I was 8 years old. It was almost 4 o'clock when I finally opened my laptop again, intending to look up directions to First National Bank. But the browser was still open to my email, and there in my inbox was a Google alert I'd set up months ago. Emily Reynolds, Portland. I'd created it back when she first got engaged, telling myself I wanted to stay informed about my sister's life, since she rarely called me directly. Really, I think I was just looking for proof that I mattered to her even peripherally. The alert linked to an article in Portland Lifestyle magazine published just that morning. The headline made my stomach clench, "The Reynolds Wedding, a Fairy Tale Come True." I clicked through, and there she was, Emily. My baby sister photographed in what must have been a $10,000 gown, platinum blonde hair cascading in perfect waves over her shoulders. She stood in the center of the frame, flanked by our parents, all three of them beaming at the camera with the kind of polished confidence that comes from never having doubted your place in the world. Mom wore her navy Chanel suit, the one she'd bought for Emily's college graduation. Dad had his arm around both women, looking proud and prosperous in his tailored jacket. I wasn't in the photograph. Of course I wasn't. The article went on for 6 paragraphs, each sentence a small blade sliding between my ribs. Emily Reynolds, 34, has built an impressive career in luxury brand marketing, representing some of Portland's most prestigious boutique hotels and restaurants. Her wedding to software entrepreneur Derek Matthews promises to be the social event of the season, a celebration of 2 accomplished professionals embarking on their journey together. There were quotes from Emily about how she and Derek had met at a charity gala, how they bonded over their shared passion for fine wine and international travel. The writer described Emily as effervescent and gracious, noting her impeccable style and the kind of warm charisma that lights up a room. Then came the paragraph that made my hands shake so badly I had to set down my coffee mug. The November ceremony will take place at the historic Pittock Mansion overlooking the city Reynolds has called home her entire life. "It's important to me to honor my family's legacy," Emily explains, gesturing to a photo of her grandparents on their own wedding day. "My parents have always emphasized the importance of elegance, of maintaining certain standards. This wedding is made possible through the generosity of the Reynolds family matriarch Margaret Reynolds, whose support has been invaluable in creating the celebration Derek and I envisioned." Family matriarch. They were calling me the family matriarch, the invisible sister who wasn't even invited to attend. I kept reading almost compulsively as the article detailed the Vera Wang dress Emily had chosen, the 12-piece string orchestra, the dinner menu designed by a James Beard-nominated chef. Every luxury purchased with my money, while they told reporters I was the generous benefactor making it all possible. The photographs continued below the text. Emily and Derek on the terrace of some upscale restaurant. Emily laughing at something off camera. Emily trying on her veil. Emily and our mother embracing in what was clearly a staged moment of tender emotion. In every single image she looked radiant, beloved, celebrated. Everything I'd never been. A memory surfaced sharp and unwanted. Emily was 19, home from her sophomore year at Berkeley. We were in the kitchen of our parents' old house, the one they sold after Mom got sick. I was 34, the same age Emily is now, and I'd just broken up with a man I'd been seeing for 6 months. He'd told me I was too serious, too responsible, that dating me felt like dating someone's mother. Emily had been making herself a smoothie, tossing in organic berries and expensive protein powder that Dad paid for. She'd looked at me with something that might have been pity and said, "You know what your problem is, Maggie. You were born to take care of people. I was born to be loved." She'd said it so casually, like she was commenting on the weather or noting that the sky was blue. Just a simple observation about the natural order of things. Our parents had been in the next room watching television, and I heard Dad laugh, heard Mom make some non-committal sound of agreement. I'd smiled, actually smiled, and then I'd changed the subject, asking Emily if she needed anything for her summer internship in Los Angeles, offering to help her shop for professional clothes. Because that's what I did. I made myself smaller, quieter, less complicated. I smoothed over the moments that hurt and pretended they hadn't left marks. 34 years old, and Emily had known exactly who she was, exactly what she was entitled to. And I'd spent the next 15 years proving her right, taking care of Mom through her illness, managing Dad's finances when his investments went south, always available, always helpful, always invisible. My laptop chimed with an incoming call. Not an email this time, but a video call request from a number I didn't recognize. I almost declined it, but something made me answer. A young woman's face appeared on the screen, professional and friendly. "Ms. Reynolds, Margaret Reynolds. This is Chloe Winters from Portland Lifestyle. I'm so glad I caught you. I'm working on a follow-up piece to this morning's wedding feature, and I was hoping to get a quote from you about your sister's big day." I stared at her, this bright-eyed journalist who probably wasn't even 30 yet, who had no idea she'd just walked into the middle of a family implosion. "The article mentioned you're the primary sponsor of the wedding," Chloe continued, her voice warm and eager. "Emily's press release specifically highlighted your generosity. I wanted to ask how it feels to help create such a special day for your sister. The readers love that angle, family supporting family. Can you tell me a bit about what this wedding means to you and how proud you must be?" The press release. Emily had sent out a press release using my name, my money, my supposed support as part of her perfect narrative, while simultaneously ensuring I wouldn't be there to witness any of it. Something cold and clear crystallized in my chest. I looked directly into the camera, my voice perfectly calm, perfectly steady. "I'm afraid there's been a mistake," I said. "I'm not sponsoring anything." Chloe's professional smile faltered. "I'm sorry, what?" "The wedding. I'm not sponsoring it. In fact, I'm not even invited. You might want to follow up with Emily about the accuracy of her press materials." I ended the call before she could respond. My phone started ringing within 90 seconds. Emily's name flashed on the screen, then Dad's, then a number I didn't recognize that was probably Chloe trying to call me back. Then Emily again. Then Mom. The calls came in waves, one after another, the phone vibrating in my hand like something alive and angry. I watched the notifications pile up, feeling nothing but that strange, crystalline calm. Let them panic. Let them scramble. For once they'd have to clean up their own mess. The calls didn't stop. If anything, they intensified as Friday evening bled into night. But the nature of the calls changed. After the first wave of panicked messages from Emily and my parents came a second wave, one I hadn't anticipated: the vendors. The wedding planner was first. Her name was Sylvia Chen, and I'd spoken to her exactly once before, back in July, when Emily had graciously allowed me to wire the initial deposit. Her voice on the voicemail was professional but strained. "Ms. Reynolds, this is Sylvia from Elite Events. I'm calling regarding a rather urgent matter with the Reynolds-Matthews wedding. Our accounting department has flagged a significant issue with the payment processing. Could you please return my call at your earliest convenience? Then the caterer, then the florist, then someone from the Pittock Mansion events office. Each message was a variation on the same theme: confusion, concern, barely concealed panic. I sat on my couch with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, listening to them pile up. My phone would ring. I'd glance at the unknown number, and I'd let it go to voicemail. Then I'd play the message back, savoring each one like a particularly good piece of dark chocolate. By 7 o'clock, Sylvia had called 3 more times. The last message had lost all pretense of professional courtesy. Ms. Reynolds, I need to speak with you immediately. The $50,000 payment to the venue has been reversed. The entire wedding is in jeopardy. We have contracts, commitments, vendors who've already purchased supplies. If we don't resolve this tonight, we'll have to begin cancellation procedures. Please, I'm begging you, call me back. I didn't call her back. Instead, I answered the next call that came through, this one from a number with a 503 area code. Portland. Hello, Ms. Margaret Reynolds. The voice was male professional with an edge of desperation that told me everything I needed to know. Speaking. This is James Rothschild from Rothschild Catering. I'm calling about the Reynolds wedding on November 14th. We've just been informed by Elite Events that there's been a reversal on the primary payment. Ms. Reynolds, we've already ordered the Copper River salmon, the organic vegetables from local farms, the custom desserts. We're talking about $30,000 in specialized ingredients, many of which are non-refundable. I need to know if this is an error or if we should begin damage control. I let the silence stretch for a moment, listening to him breathe on the other end of the line. Mr. Rothschild, I appreciate you reaching out directly. However, I'm no longer involved in this event. You'll need to contact Emily Reynolds for any payment questions. But you're listed as the primary financial sponsor on all our contracts. That was a mistake, I said calmly. Emily can clarify the arrangements. I'm sure she'll be happy to work something out with you. I could hear him processing this, the implications clicking into place. Ms. Reynolds, are you telling me the wedding funding has been withdrawn? I'm telling you to speak with Emily. Have a good evening, Mr. Rothschild. I ended the call and immediately powered off my phone. The sudden silence in my house was profound, almost physical. I sat there in the gathering darkness, not bothering to turn on any lights, feeling something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't triumph exactly. It was more like the absence of weight, the way your shoulders feel when you finally set down something you've been carrying for too long. My laptop chimed from the kitchen table. An email notification. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. I patted across the cold floor in my socks and opened the lid. The sender was someone named Marcus Chen, and the subject line read, "You deserve to know the truth." My finger hovered over the trackpad. Something about the message felt different from the vendor panic. More personal. I clicked it open. Ms. Reynolds, you don't know me, but I'm the AV technician contracted for your sister's wedding. I handle sound systems, microphones, recording equipment. Last month I was setting up for what I thought was a standard venue walkthrough, but it turned into a family planning meeting. My equipment was running the whole time. I always record these sessions for my notes to make sure I capture the client's preferences accurately. But what I heard that day has been bothering me ever since. I don't know what's happening with your family right now, but given the chaos I'm hearing from other vendors, I thought you should have this. I'm sorry if it causes you pain, but sometimes the truth is worth the hurt. The file is attached. Do what you think is right. My heart was pounding now, a sick, anticipatory dread pooling in my stomach. I scrolled down. There it was, an MP3 file labeled Reynolds Family Meeting, August 12th, MP3. The file size indicated it was substantial, 37 minutes and 42 seconds according to the properties. I stared at that attachment for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it without listening to maintain whatever illusion I still had about my family's basic decency. But that was the old Maggie, the one who smoothed things over and looked the other way, the one who made herself small and pretended not to notice when she was being erased. I downloaded the file and opened it in my media player. The waveform appeared on my screen, peaks and valleys of conversation frozen in time. I could see the preview at the top, overlapping voices, laughter, the ambient sound of a large room with good acoustics. I put my cursor over the play button and waited, giving myself one last chance to back out. Then I thought about that wedding invitation with my name conspicuously absent. About Emily telling a reporter I was the proud sponsor while ensuring I'd never see the ceremony. About being called plain invisible someone whose very presence would ruin the perfect photos. I clicked play. There was shuffling first, the sound of people settling into chairs. Someone cleared their throat. Then my father's voice, unmistakable in its authoritative tone. "All right, let's go over the final timeline. Emily, you wanted to discuss the trust fund disbursement." Emily's voice, bright and businesslike. "Right. So once Maggie's money clears and Sylvia confirmed the final payment is scheduled for October, we move forward with phase 2. Which is..." That was Derek, Emily's fiancé. I'd only met him twice, both times brief and forgettable encounters, where he'd shaken my hand with the kind of perfunctory courtesy you'd show a waiter. My father again, and my blood turned to ice at his casual tone. "Once Maggie's money clears, we'll sell the house. She'll never know." The words hung in the air of my dark kitchen like poison gas. "Once Maggie's money clears, we'll sell the house. She'll never know." I sat frozen, barely breathing as the recording continued to unspool. "Which house?" Derek's voice curious but not concerned. Just gathering information the way you might ask about stock portfolios or real estate investments. "The original family property in Laurelhurst." My father sounded almost cheerful now, the way he used to sound when explaining a particularly clever business strategy. "It's been in Elizabeth's family for 3 generations, worth about $2 million in the current market. When my wife died, it transferred into a family trust. Maggie's the primary trustee, but she doesn't really understand the paperwork. She just signs whatever I put in front of her." There was a shuffling sound, papers being moved. Then Emily spoke up, her tone practical and measured. "But Dad doesn't." Maggie have to approve any sale. I thought trustees had actual authority. "Technically, yes." My father's voice carried a smile I could hear even through the recording. "But I had her sign a power of attorney last year. Told her it was to make fund transfers easier, that it would help me manage the family accounts more efficiently after your mother passed. She didn't read it carefully. Why would she? She trusts me." The casual cruelty of that statement made my chest constrict. He was right. I had trusted him. When he'd brought me those documents last November explaining that Mom's death had created some administrative complications with the estate, I'd signed everything he put in front of me. I'd been exhausted from grief, from the memorial service planning, from fielding calls from Mom's friends who wanted to share their condolences. Dad had seemed so competent, so in control. I'd been grateful someone was handling the details. "So what's the timeline?" Derek again, all business. "Once the wedding payment clears, that's October 15th, we wait 2 weeks to make sure there are no reversals or complications. Then we list the Laurelhurst property. The market's hot right now. We should have a sale within 60 days. That's early December. The wedding will be over, everything will have settled down, and Maggie will be none the wiser until it's too late to do anything about it. And when she finds out..." Emily's voice had an edge I'd never heard before. Not concern exactly, more like strategic planning. "Won't she be upset? She loved that house. Grandma took her there every summer." My father laughed, actually laughed. "By the time she figures it out, we'll be moving to phase 2, which is where things get really elegant." Phase 2. The words made my skin crawl. I turned up the volume, slightly leaning closer to the laptop speaker, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what came next. "Phase 2 is about securing Maggie's personal assets before she can react." My father's voice had taken on a lecturing quality, like he was teaching a business seminar. "See, the problem with Maggie is that she actually has more money than people realize. She's been living like a monk for 30 years, saving everything, investing carefully. Between her retirement accounts, her savings, and the insurance payout from when Robert died, she's probably sitting on close to $400,000. Maybe more." I had no idea she had that much. Emily sounded genuinely surprised. "Nobody does. She dresses like a librarian and drives a 12-year-old Subaru. But she's been quietly building a nest egg for decades. And here's the thing, once she realizes we've sold the Laurelhurst house, she's going to be angry. She might even try to take legal action, so we need to act preemptively." There was a pause. I could hear ice clinking in a glass, someone taking a drink. Then Derek spoke, his voice careful. "What exactly are you proposing?" "We place her in managed care." My father said it so smoothly, so casually, as if he were suggesting we change cable providers. "There's a doctor I know, old friend from the country club. He'll sign off on paperwork declaring her mentally incompetent. Depression, early onset dementia, inability to manage her own affairs. Whatever diagnosis makes the most legal sense. Once she's in a facility, I have full authority to manage her assets as her designated power of attorney." The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the kitchen table, my fingernails digging into the wood. They were planning to lock me away. To take everything I'd worked for, everything I'd saved, and just erase me like I'd never existed. "Dad." Emily's voice cut through, uncertain for the first time. That's my sister we're talking about." "I know exactly who we're talking about." My father's tone had gone hard now, no more cheerful explanations. "And I'm asking you, do you want to keep this life or not? The penthouse, the luxury brand job, the society wedding, because all of that costs money, Emily. Real money. More than I have liquid right now. Your mother's medical bills nearly bankrupted us. This is how we recover. This is how we secure your future." The silence that followed lasted maybe 10 seconds. 10 seconds where my sister could have objected, could have said this was too far, could have remembered that I was a human being, and not just a resource to be exploited. She said nothing. Derek broke the silence instead. "We should move quickly, though. If she starts asking questions about the house or the trust, she won't." My father sounded absolutely certain. "Maggie's spent her whole life doing what she's told. She's 60 years old and she's never once stood up for herself. She has no life, no friends, nobody who'd even notice if she disappeared into a care facility. She's practically invisible already. We're just making it official." Emily spoke again, quieter now, but with a conviction that made my stomach turn. "She deserves this anyway. She's been living off family money for years, acting like she's some kind of martyr. This is just redistribution." The lie was so complete, so sincerely delivered, that for a moment I wondered if she actually believed it. I'd never taken a penny from them. I'd given everything, my time, my energy, my money, my entire adult life, and somehow Emily had rewritten history so thoroughly that she'd convinced herself I was the parasite. The recording continued for another 15 minutes, devolving into logistics about contractors and estate lawyers and transfer timelines. I listened to all of it, forcing myself to hear every word, every casual dismissal of my humanity. When it finally ended, the silence in my kitchen was absolute. I sat there in the dark for 5 full minutes, not moving, barely breathing. My hands were shaking. My vision had gone blurry, though I wasn't sure if it was from tears or rage or something else entirely. The wall clock ticked steadily, marking time, in a world that had just revealed itself to be far crueler than I'd imagined. Finally, I stood up. My legs felt unsteady, but I made myself walk to the old filing cabinet in the corner of my kitchen, the one I'd brought from Mom's house after she died. I'd thrown most of her papers away, but I'd kept a few things. Birth certificates, old tax returns. And at the very back of the bottom drawer, a yellowed envelope I'd never had the courage to open. It was labeled in Mom's handwriting, "For Margaret from Mom." I pulled it out, my hands still trembling, and stared at my name written in her careful script. Whatever was inside, she'd meant for me to have it. She'd known something. The lawyer's email had said as much. "Your mother wanted you to know she always knew." I slid my finger under the seal and tore it open. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper folded in thirds. Mom's handwriting covered both sides in her careful, slanted script. But there was something else, too, a small brass key taped to the top of the page with yellowed Scotch tape. I pulled it free carefully, turning it over in my palm. It was stamped with a number 447. The note was brief, just a few lines. Maggie, my darling girl, by now you know. Go to First National Bank downtown. Box 447. Your birthday is the access code. Everything you need is waiting. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive. But I can protect you now. All my love always. Mom. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with Mom's letter in front of me, that small brass key next to it, watching the hours tick by until morning. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Dad's voice from that recording. She's got no life, no friends, nobody who'd notice. I heard Emily. She deserves this anyway. And underneath it all, like a counter-melody, Mom's words, I can protect you now. At 8:30 Saturday morning, I was standing outside First National Bank waiting for them to open. I'd dressed carefully, not the comfortable, invisible clothes I usually wore, but a navy blazer I'd bought years ago for Mom's funeral and barely worn since. I wanted to look competent, serious, like someone who belonged in a bank vault accessing inherited assets. The doors unlocked at 9 exactly. I walked straight to the customer service desk where a nameplate read Susan Chen, Branch Manager. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair cut in a neat bob and reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. When I explained why I was there, her expression shifted from professional courtesy to something warmer, almost maternal. Margaret Reynolds, she said softly, standing up from her desk. Your mother told me about you. I've been expecting this call, though I'd hoped it wouldn't come. She gestured toward the back of the bank. Please follow me. We walked through the main floor, past the teller windows and the desks, where people sat filling out loan applications, to a heavy steel door marked Authorized Personnel Only. Mrs. Chen punched in a code and held the door open for me. Beyond it was a narrow hallway that led to the vault. The vault itself was exactly what you'd imagine from old movies: massive circular door, gleaming metal, the kind of security that made you feel like you were entering a fortress. Mrs. Chen moved with practiced efficiency, signing us in on a clipboard, checking my identification twice, having me verify the access code. Your mother established this in September of 2019, she said as she led me to a wall of small metal boxes, each with a number stamped on its face. She was very ill by then, I remember. But she was absolutely clear about her instructions. She said, and I quote, "My daughter will know when it's time. When she comes here, it means they've finally shown their true faces." Mrs. Chen found box 447 and inserted her master key, then gestured for me to insert mine. She was protecting you from something, wasn't she? I couldn't speak, so I just nodded. We turned our keys simultaneously, and the small door swung open. Mrs. Chen stepped back, giving me privacy. Inside was a metal drawer, perhaps 18 inches long and 6 inches deep. I pulled it out with trembling hands and carried it to the small private room adjacent to the vault. Mrs. Chen closed the door softly behind me, leaving me alone. The drawer contained 3 items: a USB drive in a clear plastic case, a passbook for a savings account, the old-fashioned kind banks don't really use anymore, and a letter, this one longer than the note from the envelope, written on Mom's good stationery, with the embossed flowers along the top. I opened the passbook first. The account name made my breath catch: Margaret Ellen Wilson Trust. Wilson was Mom's maiden name. Margaret Ellen was my full name, the one only she ever used. The balance written in the most recent entry, dated August 2019, was $847,000. $847,000. I had to read it 3 times before the number made sense. I'd known Mom came from money her parents had owned a successful lumber business in eastern Oregon, but I'd always assumed that money had gone to Dad, absorbed into the general family finances the way wives' assets so often were in marriages from that generation. Apparently not. My hands were shaking so badly I almost couldn't unfold the letter. When I finally managed it, Mom's handwriting swam before my eyes, and I had to blink hard to focus. My dearest Maggie, it began. If you're reading this, they've done exactly what I feared. I've watched your father control and diminish you for decades the same way he did to me. I couldn't leave you defenseless the way I was left defenseless. This account was funded from my inheritance from my parents' money your father never knew existed. I set it up before we married when I was still Elizabeth Wilson and had the wisdom to protect something of my own. Over the years, I added to it month by month. Every birthday of yours, every holiday, every time I saw you sacrifice something for this family, I put money aside. $50 here, $100 there. Your father never noticed. Men like him never notice the small things, and that's their weakness. This is your freedom, sweetheart. This is your chance to build a life that's truly yours. Don't let them win. Don't let them make you small. You are worth so much more than they've ever allowed you to believe. I love you more than you'll ever know. I'm sorry I couldn't be braver while I was alive. Be brave for both of us now. All my love, always and forever, Mom. I sat in that small room and cried for the first time since Mom's funeral. Not quiet, dignified tears, but huge, gasping sobs that shook my whole body. I cried for the mother who'd been trapped in the same cage I'd been trapped in. I cried for the 30 years she'd spent secretly squirreling away money protecting me the only way she knew how. I cried for all the conversations we'd never had, all the truths we'd never spoken aloud, because speaking them would have made them too real. When I finally composed myself, I picked up the USB drive. There was a small label on it in Mom's handwriting, Insurance 1987, Listen Alone. 1987. I would have been 20 years old just finishing college. What had happened that year that Mom felt she needed to record something to create insurance? I gathered everything back into the metal drawer, thanked Mrs. Chen, and drove not home but to a grocery store parking lot 3 miles away. I needed to be somewhere anonymous, somewhere no one knew me before I listened to whatever was on that drive. I plugged the USB into my laptop. There were multiple files, all audio recordings, all labeled with dates spanning from 1987 to 2018. The earliest one was labeled simply, Insurance, Losh 1987, MP3. I plugged in my earbuds, turned the volume up, and pressed play. Static first, then the sound of someone adjusting a microphone. Then Mom's voice, so much younger than I remembered it, shaking with fear or anger or both. My name is Elizabeth Wilson Reynolds. It's March 14th, 1987. I'm recording this as insurance as protection in case anything happens to me or my daughters. Last night my husband hit me for the first time, and I think... Her voice broke, steadied. I think he did something to Maggie's car. The recording continued, and I heard another voice enter the conversation, a man's voice, calm and professional. Mrs. Reynolds, I'm Thomas Brennan, the attorney you contacted. I'm here to help you document everything. Can you tell me about the car accident you mentioned? Mom's voice steadied slightly, like she was forcing herself to be clinical, detached. 6 months ago, in September of 1986, my daughter Margaret was driving home from the university. Her brakes failed on Highway 26. She went off the road, hit a tree. She was in the hospital for 2 weeks. Broken ribs, collapsed lung concussion. The doctor said she was lucky to be alive. And you believe this wasn't an accident? I know it wasn't. Mom's voice grew stronger now, angry. The mechanic who towed her car called me privately, said he needed to show me something. He took me to his shop and showed me the brake lines. They'd been cut, not frayed or worn cut. Clean slices like someone had taken a blade to them. He said in 30 years of working on cars, he'd never seen brake failure that looked like that unless it was intentional. There was a long pause. Then the lawyer spoke carefully. Mrs. Reynolds, what you're describing is attempted murder. You need to go to the police immediately. I confronted my husband that night. Mom's voice cracked. I didn't tell him about the mechanic, just said I had questions about Maggie's accident, and he didn't even try to deny it. He said Margaret needed to learn respect, that she'd embarrassed him in front of his business partners by refusing to co-sign a loan he needed. He said she was uppity, thought she was too smart for the family, needed to be taught a lesson. I sat in my car, hands pressed against my mouth, feeling like I couldn't breathe. The accident. I remembered it so clearly. The terror of pumping the brake pedal and feeling nothing, the tree rushing toward me, waking up in the hospital with Mom beside my bed, crying. I'd always thought it was just mechanical failure, just bad luck. Dad had even paid for the car to be scrapped, said he didn't want me traumatized by seeing it again. Now, I understood why. He'd been destroying evidence. The lawyer's voice on the recording was urgent. You need to take this to the police. Your husband attempted to kill your daughter. He could try again. He will try again. Mom's voice went flat dead. If I go to the police, he'll know the mechanic talked. He has friends everywhere. The police chief golfs with him. The county prosecutor went to college with him. And he told me after I confronted him, he told me very clearly if I ever try to leave, if I ever tell anyone what he's done next time, it'll be Emily. And he'll make sure I can't prove anything. The recording cut off there, but there were more files. I clicked on the next one, dated 3 months later. It was another conversation with the lawyer, this one focused on setting up the secret trust. Mom explained how she had been slowly moving money from her inheritance into an account Dad couldn't access using her maiden name, having all correspondence sent to the lawyer's office. He took everything else from me, she said. My family, my friends, my dignity. But he's not taking this. If something happens to me, Maggie needs to have something he can't touch. I listened to file after file, watching years unspool in recorded conversations. Mom documented every instance of control, every threat, every manipulation. She recorded how Dad had isolated her from her siblings, claiming they were bad influences. How he'd convinced her friends she was mentally unstable, that her moods required managing. How he'd insisted she stop working after Emily was born, then spent the next 30 years telling everyone she was too fragile for the real world. She'd tried to leave twice, once when I was 15, once when Emily was 10. Both times he'd found her, brought her back, made threats detailed enough that she never tried again. The final recording was dated June 2019. Mom's voice was thin now, ravaged by the cancer that would kill her 3 months later. If Maggie is hearing this, it means they've finally turned on her completely. My darling girl, I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive. I was weak. I was afraid. I let your father control me, diminish me, and I watched him do the same to you, and I didn't stop it. That's my greatest shame. But I can protect you now. This money is yours. These recordings are yours. Use them. Use everything. And please, sweetheart, please don't let him destroy you the way he destroyed me. You were always the strongest one, even when you didn't know it. Show them what strength really means. I love you more than life itself. Be the woman I couldn't be. Fight back. The recording ended. I sat in that parking lot in my car, tears streaming down my face, my whole body shaking. Everything I thought I knew about my life had just been rewritten. The accident that nearly killed me when I was 20 wasn't an accident. Mom's quiet submission wasn't weakness, it was survival. And all those years I'd spent wondering why she never stood up to Dad, why she never protected me, I'd had it backwards. She'd been protecting me the only way she could, quietly building me an escape route even as she remained trapped herself. I closed the laptop and pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. I whispered to the empty car, to the ghost of my mother, to the scared young woman in those recordings who'd spent 30 years planning my freedom. I will, Mom. I promise. I'll show them exactly what strength means. Then I pulled out my phone and called Janet Morrison, the attorney who'd handled Mom's estate. When she answered, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Janet, it's Maggie Reynolds. I need to see you today, right now if possible, and I need you to bring a criminal lawyer. The best one you know. There was a pause. Then Janet, who'd known my family for 20 years, said quietly, "What did you find, Maggie?" "Everything," I said. "I found everything." Janet Morrison's office was in a renovated Victorian house in downtown Portland, the kind of place that signaled both success and discretion. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, I was sitting in her conference room with a manila folder full of evidence spread across the mahogany table. Janet sat across from me, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the documents. Beside her was Robert Chen, the criminal attorney she'd called in. He was perhaps 50, with sharp eyes and an expression that gave nothing away. I'd given them everything. The audio file from Marcus, the sound engineer, documenting the conspiracy to sell the family house and institutionalize me. The USB drive from Mom with 30 years of recorded abuse and threats. The forged power of attorney Dad had tricked me into signing. The trust account documentation showing Mom's hidden assets. I even showed them the wedding invitation with my name conspicuously absent, though that felt almost trivial now compared to everything else. Robert listened to the key portions of each recording, his face growing progressively darker. When the last file finished playing, he sat back in his chair and pulled off his headphones. "Ms. Reynolds, what you have here is enough to prosecute your father for multiple felonies. Elder abuse, conspiracy, fraud, attempted conservatorship abuse under false pretenses. The 1987 recording about the car incident could potentially support an attempted murder charge, though the statute of limitations may be an issue. At minimum, we're looking at 10 to 15 years in prison for him." "Good," I said simply. Janet leaned forward, her voice gentle. "Maggie, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But we need to think strategically about how to proceed. If we go to the police now, your father will lawyer up immediately. These cases can drag on for years." "I don't want to go to the police," I said. Both attorneys looked at me in surprise. "Not yet, anyway." Robert frowned. "I'm not sure I understand. You want justice, don't you?" "I want more than justice." I met his eyes steadily. "I want them to destroy themselves. I want the whole world to see exactly who they are. My father has spent 60 years building a reputation as a respected businessman, a family man. Emily has crafted this perfect image on social media, the beautiful daughter with the fairy tale life. I want all of it exposed. I want the wedding to collapse publicly. I want their friends and neighbors and business associates to know what they really are. And then when they're desperate and cornered, when they've shown everyone their true faces, that's when we prosecute." There was a long silence. Janet and Robert exchanged glances. Finally, Robert spoke carefully. "What you're describing is risky, Ms. Reynolds. If they discover you're behind the exposure, they could retaliate. Your father has already demonstrated he's capable of violence. They already plan to lock me away in a facility and steal everything I have." I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "They were going to erase me completely and tell everyone it was for my own good. What exactly is left for me to fear death? That would be easier than what they had planned." Janet reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "All right. If this is what you want, we'll help you. But we do it carefully, methodically. Everything documented, everything legal. We can't give them any ammunition to use against you." "Agreed," I said. "So what's first?" Robert pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. "First, we researched Derek Matthews thoroughly. If he's part of this conspiracy, we need to know everything about him. His background, his finances, his history. I'm guessing a man who agrees to help institutionalize his fiancée's sister for money has done this kind of thing before." "I know someone," Janet said. "Sarah Kim. Former FBI, now does private investigation work. She's expensive, but she's the best. I'll call her tonight." "Do it," I said. Money isn't an issue anymore. It felt strange saying that, like the words belonged to someone else. But I had almost $1 million in Mom's trust account, and I was finally going to use it the way she'd intended, as a weapon. Sarah Kim called me Sunday evening with her preliminary findings. I was in my kitchen making tea when my phone rang, and her voice was brisk and professional. "Ms. Reynolds, I've been reviewing Derek Matthews' background. What I've found is concerning. I'm sending you a full report, but here are the highlights. Derek has been married 3 times before Emily. All 3 marriages ended in financial devastation for the wives." I sat down slowly, gripping the phone. "Tell me." Wife number 1, Michelle Cortez, married him in 2012. Lost her family home in foreclosure 18 months later. Wife number 2. Jennifer Wu declared bankruptcy in 2016 after Derek emptied their joint accounts and disappeared. Wife number 3, Patricia Chen, died by suicide in 2020. Her sister told me Derek had systematically isolated Patricia from her family, gained access to her trust fund, and vanished with nearly $400,000. Patricia left a note saying she couldn't live with what she'd let happen. My hand was shaking. He killed her. Maybe not directly, but he killed her. There's more, Sarah continued. Derek specifically targets women from families with elderly parents and existing drama. He exploits the dysfunction positions himself as the stable partner gains financial access and then disappears once the assets are liquidated. Emily fits his pattern perfectly. Troubled family dynamics, aging parents with assets, a sister who could be painted as the problem. I'd say he and your father found each other quite conveniently. How long until you have the full report? 48 hours. I'm tracking down the previous wives now, seeing if any of them will talk on record. Do whatever you need to do, I said. I want everything. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time thinking. Derek wasn't just an opportunist who'd gotten pulled into Dad's scheme. He was a predator who'd probably orchestrated his own version of this con multiple times. Emily thought she was marrying a successful entrepreneur. Really, she was marrying a professional parasite. I pulled out my phone and opened a new text message. I had Derek's number from the family group chat Emily had created for wedding planning. I'd been removed from that chat 2 weeks ago, but I'd saved the contact information. I typed carefully. Derek, this is Margaret Reynolds. We should meet. I have a proposition that benefits us both. Come alone. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Pete's Coffee on Hawthorne. Don't tell Emily or my father. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The message showed as delivered, then read. 3 dots appeared indicating he was typing. Then they disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally a response. I'll be there. This should be interesting. I smiled, set down my phone, and finished making my tea. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for him to walk into it. I didn't choose Pete's Coffee. That had been a test to see if Derek would accept my terms or try to change them. When he showed up at the Hawthorne location at exactly 2 o'clock Monday afternoon, I was already gone. Instead, I texted him a new address, Higgins Restaurant downtown, a place known for power lunches and discreet business meetings. The kind of establishment with security cameras at every angle and enough ambient noise that conversations stayed private but could be recorded if needed. I'd arrived 30 minutes early, chosen a table near the window but not too visible from the street, and activated the recording app on my phone tucked in my purse. Robert Chen had insisted I document everything, and I'd agreed. Whatever happened next, I wanted proof. Derek arrived 15 minutes late, which I suspected was intentional. A power move making me wait, establishing dominance. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost $3,000 and moved through the restaurant like he owned it, nodding at the hostess with easy familiarity. When he reached my table, his smile was warm, practiced the kind that had probably fooled 3 women into marrying him. Margaret, he said, extending his hand, I have to say I didn't expect to hear from you. Emily's been quite worried about your recent silence. I didn't take his hand. Instead, I gestured to the chair across from me. Sit down, Derek, and let's skip the performance. I know about Michelle Cortez. I know about Jennifer Wu. I know about Patricia Chen. His smile froze, then slowly faded. He lowered himself into the chair, his body language shifting from confident to calculating in an instant. You've done your homework. More than homework. I slid a manila folder across the table, the same one Sarah Kim had delivered to my house at midnight last night. Everything's in there. Marriage certificates, divorce records, bank statements showing the money you stole, interviews with Michelle and Jennifer, Patricia's suicide note which her sister was kind enough to share. You're not marrying my sister because you love her. You're marrying her because you saw an opportunity. The question is whether you're smart enough to take a better one. Derek opened the folder slowly, his eyes scanning the documents. I watched his jaw tighten as he recognized his own signatures, his own crimes laid out in black and white. When he looked up, the charm was completely gone. What do you want? I want you to leave Emily. I said, my voice steady and cold. Today, right now, I'll pay you $200,000 in cash. You walk away, disappear, and we never speak again. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. Why would you help your sister after the way she's treated you? After they uninvited you from the wedding, used your money, called you plain and invisible? Why do you care what happens to her? I don't care about Emily, I said, and I was surprised to find it was partly true. I care about the child. Derek's expression shifted, confusion flickering across his face. What child? Emily's 12 weeks pregnant. I watched him process this information, watched the calculations running behind his eyes. She hasn't told anyone yet. Not you, not our parents. She's been hiding it, probably planning to announce it after the wedding once she had you legally bound. But I won't let my sister's baby be raised by a man who drove his last wife to suicide. So I'm offering you a way out that doesn't involve prison or a baby you don't want. He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table. Then he smiled, but it wasn't warm anymore. It was the smile of a predator recognizing another predator. 200,000 isn't enough. Not for walking away from what your father's offering me. And what exactly is my father offering you? You really don't know? Derek leaned forward, his voice dropping. Your father approached me 2 weeks ago. Said he needed help managing you after the wedding. That you were becoming unstable, that you'd need to be placed in care, and that he'd give me 30% of your assets once the conservatorship was in place. He's already got the paperwork ready, already got a doctor lined up to declare you incompetent. My blood ran cold, even though I'd heard all of this on Marcus's recording. Hearing it directly from Derek, seeing the casual way he discussed my planned imprisonment, made it real in a different way. So here's my counteroffer, Derek continued. 500,000, cash. And I want copies of everything you have on your father's plans. Because I'm not the only predator in this family, Mrs. Reynolds. Your father's been running this con a lot longer than I have, and he's planning to betray me just like he's betrayed you. So let's make a deal. You and I destroy him together. I kept my face neutral, but my mind was racing. This was better than I'd hoped. Derek was offering to become a witness to provide evidence against Dad, all while thinking he was manipulating me. You have recordings, I asked. Hours of them. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through files. Every conversation I've had with your father I've recorded. Insurance, you understand. I learned a long time ago to never trust business partners, especially ones who smile too much. Your father has no idea I've been documenting everything. Show me. He selected a file and turned the phone toward me. I heard Dad's voice, cold and businesslike. Derek, I need you to understand something. Once we have Margaret placed, you'll need to be patient. The asset liquidation takes time. But your cut will be substantial. We're talking at least 150,000, possibly more. I'd heard enough. I looked up at Derek, meeting his eyes. 500,000, I said. Paid in 3 installments. 100,000 now, 200,000 when you leave Emily, and 200,000 after you testify against my father. You give me copies of all your recordings, and you disappear from Oregon permanently. Derek smiled, that predator's smile again. You're smarter than they think you are. Everyone is, I said. That's their first mistake. He extended his hand across the table. We have a deal. This time I took it. Derek sent me the first batch of recordings that evening. 18 audio files ranging from 3 minutes to nearly 40, all time-stamped and labeled with locations. I sat in my home office with my laptop headphones on and listened to every single one. What I heard was a masterclass in mutual betrayal, 2 predators circling each other, each convinced he was manipulating the other, neither realizing they were both being watched by someone smarter than either of them. The most damning file was labeled Reynolds Office Sept 28. Dad's voice came through clearly, that familiar authoritative tone he used when discussing business. Derek, I need you to understand the timeline here. Margaret is becoming a problem. She's asking questions about the trust about Elizabeth's estate. We need to move faster than planned. After the wedding, I'll need your help managing her, getting her placed in appropriate care. I'm prepared to offer you 30% of her assets once we have conservatorship established. We're talking about $300,000, possibly more. Derek's voice on the recording was careful non-committal. That's a significant undertaking, John. What exactly would my role be? Support? Testimony if needed. You'd confirm that Margaret has been showing signs of confusion, memory issues, inability to manage her affairs. The doctor I've arranged will handle the medical side, but having a witness, especially one about to become family, adds credibility. I listened to the rest, hearing Derek probe for details, while never fully committing, always leaving himself room to back out. He'd been gathering insurance from the beginning, just like Mom had done with her recordings 35 years ago. The difference was, Derek planned to use his insurance for profit. I planned to use mine for justice. The next morning, I met with Robert Chen and Janet Morrison again. I played them Derek's recordings and outlined my plan. Robert was skeptical. You're making a deal with a con artist who's destroyed multiple lives. How do you know he won't betray you the same way he betrayed everyone else? Because I'm not signing anything that's actually enforceable, I said. I slid a document across the table. Janet drafted this agreement last night. It looks official, uses all the right legal language, but it's structured so that Derek has no actual recourse if I don't pay. The immunity clause is contingent on conditions that I control. He thinks he's protected, but really he's given me everything I need while getting nothing guaranteed in return. Janet nodded. It's a shell agreement. Looks real, feels real, but legally it's Swiss cheese. If Derek tries to enforce it, any judge will throw it out. And you're recording everything? Robert asked. Everything, I confirmed. Every meeting, every text message, every phone call. Derek thinks we're partners. Really, he's just another piece of evidence. Derek signed the agreement that afternoon at Janet's office, his signature confident and assured. I watched him scan the document one last time, seeing him miss every carefully crafted loophole, every escape clause that favored me. When he looked up, he was smiling. To new partnerships, he said. To getting what we deserve, I replied. The next phase of the plan required Derek to do what he did best, manipulate and deceive. I instructed him to meet with Dad and claim that I'd confronted him, that I knew about their conspiracy, and that they needed to move faster before I could take legal action. The meeting was set for Wednesday evening at the Heath Man Hotel Bar, a location I'd chosen specifically because Sarah Kim had already been there that morning, working with the hotel's security team. Derek had signed a consent form allowing us to record his conversations, which made everything we were doing perfectly legal. Sarah had positioned 3 different recording devices throughout the bar, each one capturing different angles. I watched the live feed from my car 2 blocks away, parked in a grocery store lot with my laptop open, Sarah sitting beside me in the passenger seat. Dad arrived first, ordering a scotch and checking his phone repeatedly. When Derek walked in 10 minutes later, I could see the tension in Dad's shoulders, even through the grainy video feed. Their conversation started cordially enough, but Derek didn't waste time. We have a problem, John. Margaret knows. She confronted me yesterday, said she knows about the conservatorship plan, about the house sale, all of it. Dad's face went pale. That's impossible. How could she? Does it matter how? The point is she knows and she's angry. She mentioned lawyers' investigations. We need to move now before she can build a case. I watched Dad's hand shake as he lifted his glass. The conservatorship paperwork isn't ready. The doctor needs at least 2 more weeks to establish a pattern of incompetence. We can't rush this, or it'll look suspicious. Derek leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that Sarah's equipment still caught perfectly. Then, maybe we need to consider alternative solutions, more permanent ones. Dad was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made my blood freeze, even though I'd been expecting it, even though I knew he was capable of it. Do you know anyone who could handle that kind of problem discreetly? Handle it how exactly? Make her disappear. Dad's voice was flat, businesslike. An accident, a robbery, whatever. As long as it can't be traced back to us. Derek sat back and I could see him processing this. See him realizing that my father had just crossed a line that turned this from fraud into something much darker. "You're talking about killing your own daughter." "I'm talking about protecting what's mine," Dad said. "Margaret has been a burden her entire life. This is just solving a problem that should have been solved a long time ago." The feed continued for another 20 minutes with Derek carefully drawing out more details, more explicit statements, more evidence of intent. When the meeting finally ended and Derek walked out of the hotel, I saw him pull out his phone immediately. My phone rang 30 seconds later. Derek's voice was shaken in a way I hadn't heard before, genuine fear cutting through his usual polish. "Margaret, we need to talk. Right now. Your father just asked me if I knew anyone who could make you disappear. He's not talking about a nursing home anymore. He's talking about killing you. And I have the whole conversation recorded." I met Derek in the same grocery store parking lot where I'd watched the hotel bar surveillance. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in his BMW with the engine running. When I knocked on the passenger window, he jumped. His face was pale, his usual composure completely shattered. He unlocked the door and I slid inside. "Play it," I said. He handed me his phone with the audio file already queued. I pressed play and heard my father's voice cold and measured like he was discussing a stock portfolio. "I've thought about what you said, Derek. About Margaret being a problem we need to solve permanently. I'm prepared to make this worth your while. I can transfer $1 million to an offshore account. You have connections in that world, don't you? People who handle these kinds of situations." Derek's voice on the recording was careful, still playing his role. "John, that's your daughter we're talking about. Are you sure you want to go down this road?" "I don't have daughters anymore." Dad's words were so casual, so matter-of-fact, they didn't sound real. "I have liabilities and assets. Margaret is a liability that's threatening everything I've built. She needs to be removed from the equation. Make it look like an accident, a fall, a home invasion, a robbery gone wrong. I don't care about the details. I just need it done, and I need it untraceable." The recording continued for 18 minutes. I listened to every second, hearing my father describe scenarios he'd apparently researched. A staged car accident on a rural road. A fall down the stairs that could be explained by her living alone, no witnesses. A break-in where things went tragically wrong. He'd thought through multiple options, weighed their risks, discussed how each would play to police and to his social circle. It was meticulous, calculated, and absolutely monstrous. When the file ended, I sat in silence. Derek was watching me, waiting for a reaction. "I thought you should hear it in person," he said quietly. "I know we're not exactly friends, but Jesus Christ, Margaret. That's your father talking about killing you like he's ordering takeout." For the first time since this had all started, I felt genuine fear. Not the anger or betrayal or hurt I'd been carrying, actual fear. My father wasn't just a controlling narcissist or a financial abuser. He was someone capable of murder, someone who'd apparently tried once before with my car accident in 1987, and someone who was now actively planning to finish what he'd started. I pulled out my own phone and called Robert Chen. He answered on the second ring. "Maggie, everything okay?" "No," I said. "I need you to listen to something." I put him on speaker and played the recording again. When it finished, there was a long silence. "You need to go to the police right now," Robert said, his voice tight. "Tonight. This is an active threat on your life. We file for emergency restraining orders, we get you protection, and we turn this over to law enforcement immediately." "No." The word came out firm, certain. "Maggie, this isn't a game anymore. Your father is soliciting murder. That's not fraud or elder abuse or conspiracy, that's attempted murder. You could die. If we move now, he'll lawyer up immediately," I said. "He'll claim the recording is fabricated, taken out of context, that Derek manufactured it for money. He has connections, Robert. The police chief plays golf with him. Half the county prosecutor's office has attended his charity dinners. He'll fight this and he might win." "So what do you want to do?" Robert's frustration was palpable. "I want him to act," I said. "I want indisputable evidence. I want him caught in the middle of commissioning a murder with video, with witnesses, with no possible way to claim it was all a misunderstanding." Robert was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. "You're asking me to help you set up a sting operation. That's dangerous, Maggie. If anything goes wrong—" "I've lived my whole life afraid of him," I interrupted. "Afraid to speak up, afraid to challenge him, afraid to exist too loudly. I'm done being afraid. Help me do this right, or I'll do it alone." Another pause. Then Robert said, "I know someone. Former police detective, now works as a consultant. He can pose as a contractor, help us set this up properly. But we do this carefully with full surveillance and backup. The meeting happens in a controlled environment with police nearby. Agreed?" "Agreed." Over the next 72 hours, we built the trap. Derek would tell Dad he'd found someone willing to do the job for $800,000. The meeting would be in 6 days at a parking garage downtown, public enough to seem legitimate, private enough for a criminal conversation, and completely wired with cameras and microphones. Robert's consultant, a man named Thomas Rivera, who'd spent 20 years in homicide, would play the role of the hired killer. Police would be stationed in unmarked cars throughout the garage, ready to move the moment Dad handed over money or gave explicit instructions. I spent those days in a strange state of suspension, going through the motions of normal life, while knowing I was bait in a trap designed to catch my own father. I grocery shopped, I went to the library, I watered my plants. Every time my phone rang, my heart jumped, expecting Dad to call with some mundane question that would really be him checking whether I suspected anything. It was 3 days before the scheduled meeting when Emily appeared at my door. I'd just finished dinner, was washing my single plate and fork in the sink when I heard the doorbell. I almost didn't answer. I wasn't expecting anyone, and part of me wondered if Dad had sent someone to check on me. But when I looked through the peephole, I saw Emily standing on my porch, her face blotchy and tear-streaked, her perfect makeup ruined by crying. I opened the door. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and said, "Derek left me. He just vanished. The wedding's off. The venue called everything's being canceled. I've lost everything, Maggie." Her voice broke. "And I'm pregnant. I'm 12 weeks pregnant and he's gone and I don't know what to do." Then my sister collapsed into my arms, sobbing like her world had ended. I stood frozen in my doorway, my sister's weight suddenly against me, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and ancient. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't process what was happening. This was Emily, the golden child, the perfect daughter, the one who'd called me plain and invisible and not worth a place at her wedding. And now she was falling apart in my arms. Part of me wanted to push her away, to tell her she'd made her choices and now had to live with them. But another part, the part that remembered us as children before Dad had turned us into competitors for his approval, that part couldn't leave her standing on my porch in the cold October night. I stepped back, bringing her with me, and closed the door. "Come in," I said quietly. Emily stumbled into my living room and collapsed onto my couch. She'd lost weight since I'd last seen her 3 weeks ago. Her designer clothes, a cream silk blouse, and tailored pants that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget were wrinkled and stained. Her makeup, usually flawless, was smeared across her face in dark streaks. She looked like a broken doll someone had thrown away. I went to my kitchen and made tea, the same chamomile blend Mom used to make when one of us was sick. My hands moved automatically, filling the kettle, finding cups, adding honey the way Emily liked it, even though she probably didn't remember I knew that about her. When I brought the mugs back to the living room, she was curled into herself, one hand pressed protectively against her stomach. "Derek disappeared 3 days ago," she said, her voice raw and hoarse. "Just vanished. His phone's disconnected, his apartment's cleared out, all his social media deleted. The wedding venue called yesterday asking about final payments. I told them to check with Maggie, but they said the payments were all reversed. Everything's canceled. Mom and Dad won't return my calls. I think they blame me for losing the wedding funding. I have nowhere else to go." She took the tea I offered, wrapping both hands around the warm mug like it was the only solid thing in her world. "I knew he was using me," she said after a long silence. "Part of me knew from the beginning. the way he asked about family money, about Dad's investments, about your trust fund. But I told myself I could change him, that if I was perfect enough, beautiful enough, gave him everything he wanted, he'd actually fall in love with me. God, how stupid was I? Not stupid, I heard myself say. Hopeful. There's a difference. She laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. You know what's funny? I've been jealous of you my whole life. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. You were always real, Maggie. You said what you thought, did what you believed in, never pretended to be something you weren't. I was just a doll they dressed up and posed. I knew Mom and Dad favored me, knew it was unfair, but I enjoyed the attention too much to question it. And then I started believing my own performance. Started thinking I actually was better than you, more important, more deserving. She set down her tea and pressed both hands to her face. Those things I said about you ruining the wedding photos, about you looking plain, I didn't even fully mean them. I was just playing the part Dad wanted me to play. The perfect daughter who doesn't need her embarrassing older sister around. But somewhere along the way, I forgot it was a part. I forgot you were a person with feelings. I forgot we used to be friends. The admission hung in the air between us. I sat down in the chair across from her, my own tea untouched in my hands. This was Emily, stripped of all her defenses, all her performance, showing me the scared and damaged person underneath. And despite everything, despite the uninvitation, despite the cruelty, despite years of being treated as less than, I felt something in my chest soften. I'm pregnant, Emily said quietly. 12 weeks. I haven't told anyone. I was going to announce it at the wedding, thought it would be this perfect moment. Everyone celebrating 2 pieces of good news at once. But now, Derek's gone, the wedding's off, and I'm going to be a single mother with parents who won't speak to me and a sister who has every reason to hate me. She looked at me, her expression raw and pleading. Do you hate me, Maggie? Because I'd understand if you did. I thought about my answer for a long time. Did I hate her? Or did I hate what she'd been turned into? The role Dad had forced her to play, the golden child competing for scraps of approval from a man who was incapable of real love. No, I said finally. I don't hate you. I'm angry and I'm hurt and I don't trust you. But I don't hate you. Emily started crying again, quieter this time, tears of relief or exhaustion, or maybe just the release of years of held tension. I let her cry, didn't offer false comfort or promises I couldn't keep. In 3 days, I was supposed to help catch our father in the act of soliciting my murder. Emily didn't know anything about that, about the recordings, or the conspiracy, or the decades of abuse. She was just a pregnant woman who'd been abandoned by her con artist fiancé, sitting in her estranged sister's house with nowhere else to go. Mom's words came back to me. Protect what matters. I'd thought she meant protect myself, my assets, my life. But maybe she'd meant something bigger. Maybe she'd meant protect the possibility of family, protect the next generation, protect Emily from becoming another casualty in Dad's endless war against anything that threatened his control. You can stay here tonight, I told Emily. The guest room's made up. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. She nodded, not speaking, just holding her tea and crying silently. I showed her to the guest room, gave her a clean towel and one of my old nightgowns that would be too big on her thin frame. When I finally got back to my own room and closed the door, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from Derek. Meeting moved up to tomorrow. Your father is getting nervous. He's pushing to accelerate everything. If you're backing out, tell me now because he's not playing games anymore. He asked me again today if I could handle it myself. I think he's getting desperate. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Tomorrow. Not 6 days from now, but tomorrow. Which meant I had to decide right now whether to go through with this, knowing that if I did, Emily's world was about to explode in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. I thought about the baby sleeping in her womb, about Mom's recordings, about the car accident that nearly killed me, about Dad's cold voice saying he didn't have daughters anymore, only liabilities and assets. I typed back, "Tomorrow is fine. Send me the details." Then I lay in bed listening to Emily cry softly in the room next door and wondered if I was about to save my family or destroy what little was left of it. I left Emily sleeping in my guest room at 7 the next morning, a note on the kitchen counter telling her to help herself to breakfast and that I'd be back by noon. I didn't tell her where I was going. How could I? "Your father is meeting someone today to arrange my murder, and I'm going to watch it happen." Seemed like the kind of conversation that required more preparation than I had time for. The parking garage was in downtown Portland, a 4-story concrete structure that served the business district. Robert Chen had chosen it specifically because it had multiple entry and exit points, good sight lines, and enough ambient traffic that our surveillance wouldn't look suspicious. I arrived at the staging location 2 blocks away at 8:30, climbing into the back of an unmarked van where Robert was already setting up equipment. Detective Maria Santos was there too, a compact woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the kind of calm competence that came from years of working vice and organized crime. She shook my hand firmly. "Ms. Reynolds, I want you to understand what's about to happen. We have 3 cameras positioned in the garage, one in Detective Rivera's car, one in a maintenance vehicle, and one in what appears to be a broken security camera housing. Your associate Derek Matthews is wearing a wire. The moment your father makes an explicit statement about harming you or exchanges money, we move in. This is a clean operation with multiple witnesses and recordings. There's no way he walks away from this." I nodded, not trusting my voice. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them together in my lap. Robert handed me a set of headphones. "You'll be able to hear everything through Derek's wire. But Maggie, if at any point this becomes too much, you can step out. You don't have to witness this." "Yes, I do," I said. "I need to hear every word." Thomas Rivera. The undercover officer playing the contractor arrived at 9. He was perhaps 55 with the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades on the street. He'd been briefed extensively on Dad's background, his business connections, his patterns of behavior. "Men like your father are predictable," he told me before heading to the garage. "They think money and status make them untouchable. That arrogance is what gets them caught." Derek arrived at 9:30, parking on the 3rd level as planned. Through the camera feed, I watched him check his wire, adjust his jacket, take several deep breaths. Whatever else he was playing his role perfectly. I wondered if he was scared or just calculating his next move, already thinking about how to leverage this situation for maximum personal gain. My father arrived at exactly 10 o'clock. I watched him park his Mercedes, check his reflection in the rearview mirror, straighten his tie. He looked like he was going to a business meeting, not arranging a murder. The casual confidence in his movements made my stomach turn. He met Derek first near the elevator bank. Their voices came through clearly on the wire. "Is he here?" Dad asked. "3rd level northeast corner. Gray sedan." Derek's voice was steady. "He wants to confirm the money first." "It's ready. Offshore account untraceable. 800,000 as agreed. Half now, half when it's done." They walked together to Rivera's car. I watched on the surveillance feed as my father approached the driver's window, leaned down, spoke through the opening. Rivera's voice came through Derek's wire, gruff and professional. "You're the client." "I am. I understand you can help me with a problem that needs to be handled discreetly." "Depends on the problem. I don't do anything that brings heat." Dad glanced around, confirming they were alone. "It's a family matter. Someone who's become a liability. I need them removed permanently, but in a way that looks accidental. Can you handle that?" "I can handle anything for the right price." "Who's the target?" "My daughter. Margaret Reynolds. Lives alone in Eugene, predictable schedule. I need it to look like a robbery gone wrong or a home invasion. Something the police will write off as random violence." My vision blurred. Hearing him say it so casually, so matter-of-factly, made it real in a way the recordings hadn't. This was my father, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd paid for my college education, who'd walked me through the hospital when Mom was dying. and he was calmly discussing the best way to murder me. Rivera pressed for details. Timeline. Within 2 weeks. Sooner if possible. She's asking questions, getting suspicious. The longer we wait, the more risk. Method preferences. Dad actually seemed to consider this. Make it painful enough to be believable, but quick enough that there's no extended investigation. A struggle, signs of forced entry, maybe sexual assault to muddy the motive. Whatever keeps the police from looking at family. I closed my eyes, headphones pressing against my ears, hearing every word and wishing I couldn't. Detective Santos touched my shoulder gently but said nothing. And payment? Rivera asked. Half now, half on completion. I can transfer $400,000 today. You'll have proof of funds before you leave this garage. That was the signal. Detective Santos spoke into her radio. All units move in, now. Through the surveillance feed, I watched police cars appear from 3 different directions, blocking all exits. Officers in tactical gear emerged from vehicles I'd thought were civilian. Dad's face went from composed to confused to absolutely terrified in the space of 3 seconds. He spun around looking for escape, finding none. "What is this?" he shouted. "What's happening?" Derek stepped back from the car, pulling his jacket open to reveal the wire pack taped to his chest. "It's over, Mr. Reynolds. Every word is recorded. Every promise you made, every detail you gave. They have everything." 2 officers moved in, and I heard them reading my father his rights through Derek's still active microphone. "John Reynolds, you are under arrest for solicitation of murder conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. You have the right to remain attorney." The words faded as they handcuffed him and began walking him toward a police vehicle. Through the camera feed, I watched my father's face cycle through emotions: denial, rage, fear, calculation. He shouted something about lawyers, about this being entrapment, about Derek being a liar and a con artist. His voice rose to a scream as they put him in the back of the police car, then finally broke into something that might have been crying. It was done. 58 years of control of manipulation of abuse ended in a parking garage with handcuffs and Miranda rights. As the police cars began to pull away, Derek turned slowly, deliberately toward the maintenance vehicle where our main camera was hidden. He looked directly at the lens, directly at where he knew I was watching. He smiled, not the charming smile he used on Marks, but something colder, more knowing, and mouthed 2 words, "You're welcome." Then he walked away, hands in his pockets, disappearing into the parking garage and out of sight. Robert pulled off his own headphones. "We got him, Maggie. Everything we need. Your father's not walking away from this." I nodded, still staring at the screen where Derek had been standing. "What about Derek?" Detective Santos and Robert exchanged glances. "He was working with us," Santos said carefully. "He gets immunity for his cooperation. That was the deal." "I know what the deal was," I said quietly. "I'm the one who made it." The story hit the news before I even made it back to my house. Robert called me while I was still driving, his voice tight with urgency. "Turn on the radio. Any station. It's everywhere." I switched on NPR and heard the anchor's voice, carefully neutral, but unable to hide the sensational nature of what she was reporting. "Breaking news out of Portland this morning. John Reynolds, 67, a prominent local businessman and philanthropist, has been arrested on charges of solicitation of murder and conspiracy to commit murder. According to police sources, Reynolds allegedly attempted to hire someone to kill a family member. The intended victim, whose identity is being protected, was reportedly Reynolds' own daughter. More details as this story develops." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I'd known this would be public, had wanted it to be public, but hearing it broadcast across the city made it real in a way I hadn't prepared for. By the time I pulled into my driveway 20 minutes later, there were already 2 news vans parked on my street. Emily was standing at my living room window when I came inside, still wearing the nightgown I'd lent her, her face pale as she stared at the television. Every local channel was running the same story, showing footage of Dad being led from the parking garage in handcuffs, his face twisted with rage and fear. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Reynolds arrested alleged plot to murder daughter." "Maggie," Emily said without turning around, her voice hollow. "What is this? What's happening?" I set down my purse and closed the door behind me. "It's exactly what it looks like. Dad tried to hire someone to kill me. The police caught him in the act." She finally turned to face me, her eyes wide and disbelieving. "That's impossible. Dad would never, he couldn't." "He could and he did." I kept my voice level, factual. 2 weeks ago, I found out he was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent and placed in a facility so he could steal my assets. When I started pulling my money out of the wedding, when I began asking questions, he decided I was too much of a risk. So he tried to have me killed. Emily's legs seemed to give out. She sank onto my couch, one hand pressed to her mouth. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew for 2 weeks and you didn't tell me." "Would you have believed me?" I asked quietly. "If I'd come to you 2 weeks ago and said Dad was planning to kill me and Derek was helping him, would you have believed me? Or would you have run straight to Dad and warned him?" The silence that followed was devastating because we both knew the answer. Emily closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. Derek was part of it. Derek was part of everything. The wedding, the conspiracy to steal from me, all of it. He's a professional con artist who targets women from dysfunctional families. You were never anything to him except access to money. The news coverage continued for hours. By noon, reporters were camping outside our parents' house in the Pearl District. I watched the coverage with a strange sense of detachment as neighbors were interviewed, all expressing shock and disbelief. "John Reynolds was such a respected man," one elderly woman said. "He donated to every charity in the neighborhood. I can't believe he could do something like this." But others had different stories. A former business partner mentioned that Dad had always been controlling, that there were rumors about how he treated his wife. A woman who'd worked as the family's housekeeper years ago said she'd always felt sorry for the older daughter, the quiet one who seemed to disappear whenever the family was together. By the second day, the media had connected Emily's canceled wedding to the story. Sources close to the family say Reynolds's younger daughter, Emily Reynolds, was set to marry later this month in what was being described as Portland's wedding of the season. However, the wedding was abruptly canceled 2 weeks ago after the bride's older sister withdrew financial support. It now appears that cancellation may have triggered the events leading to Reynolds's arrest. Emily read the articles on her phone, her face growing paler with each one. "They're going to think I knew," she said. "They're going to think I was part of it." "Were you?" I asked, not unkindly. "No." She looked up at me, desperate for me to believe her. "I knew Dad favored me, knew he was planning something with the family trust, but I swear I didn't know about the murder plot. I didn't know he was trying to have you institutionalized. I thought he was just being Dad, controlling and manipulative, but not actually dangerous." I wanted to believe her. Part of me did believe her. Emily had always been willfully blind to Dad's true nature, but that was different from being complicit in attempted murder. "What about Derek?" I asked. "When did he really leave?" 3 days before Dad's arrest." Emily's voice was small. "He just disappeared. Took all his things, cleared out his bank accounts. I thought he'd gotten cold feet about the marriage. I didn't know he was running because he knew what was coming." I pulled out my phone and tried Derek's number for the 5th time that day. Still disconnected. I called Sarah Kim. She answered on the first ring. "I was just about to call you," she said. "Derek withdrew $200,000 from an account at Bank of America yesterday. Cash. Then he cleared out his apartment and disappeared. His car's GPS was disabled, his phone's off, and none of his known associates have heard from him. Where do you think he went? Could be anywhere. Men like Derek are professionals at vanishing. He's probably already in another state scanning for his next mark." I thanked her and hung up. Emily was watching me. "He got away, didn't he? Dad's in jail, my life is destroyed, you almost died, and Derek just walks away with money in his pocket." "For now," I said. But even as I said it, I wondered if that was true. Derek had played everyone, including me. He'd positioned himself perfectly, giving enough evidence to take down Dad while securing his own immunity, then disappearing with partial payment before anyone could stop him. A week after Dad's arrest, a package arrived at my house. No return address, just my name written in neat block letters on the label. Emily had gone to stay with a friend, unable to handle the constant media presence and the weight of what our family had become. I was alone when I opened the package. Inside was a flash drive and a single piece of paper. The handwriting was Derek's neat and precise. "You're welcome for the father, but you still owe me $300K. I'll be in touch about collection. P.S. I left you a gift on the drive. Consider it insurance for both of us." My hands were shaking as I carried the flash drive to my laptop. Whatever was on it, Derek thought it was valuable enough to use as leverage, which meant it was either incredibly damaging or incredibly useful. I plugged it in, and a folder appeared on my screen labeled simply Reynolds Family Insurance. Inside were files I'd never seen before, recordings I didn't know existed. And the first one, dated just 3 weeks ago, was labeled Emily Derek Planning Session, MP3. I clicked play, and my sister's voice filled my quiet house. I stared at the file name, my cursor hovering over it, but not clicking. Emily and Derek planning something 3 weeks ago, before the wedding cancellation, before Derek disappeared, before everything fell apart. What could they have been planning that Derek thought was worth keeping as insurance against me? Before I could talk myself out of it, I clicked play. The audio quality was good, clearly recorded on a decent device. Emily's voice came through, first anxious and uncertain. "Are you sure this is going to work? What if Maggie finds out?" Derek's response was smooth, reassuring. "She won't find out. Your sister's too busy playing martyr to notice what's actually happening. By the time she realizes the wedding funding is gone, we'll have already liquidated the Laurelhurst property and moved the money offshore." My stomach dropped. Emily had known. She'd been part of it. But then Emily's voice again, and there was something in it I hadn't expected. Doubt. "I don't know, Derek. This feels wrong. She's my sister, and Dad's plan to put her in a home that's business," Derek interrupted. "Look, Emily, you need to decide right now what kind of life you want. You can be sentimental about your sister and end up with nothing, or you can be smart and secure your future. Your father's offering us a way out of debt, a way to live the life you've always wanted. All you have to do is not interfere." There was a long pause. Then Emily, her voice small. "What if something goes wrong? What if Maggie gets hurt?" "Nothing's going to happen to her. She'll be in a nice facility taken care of, and you'll never have to worry about money again. It's win-win." The recording continued for another 10 minutes, Derek systematically dismantling Emily's objections, playing on her fears and insecurities. But what struck me wasn't that Emily had initially gone along with it. It was that she'd had doubts, had questioned it, had expressed concern for me even while being manipulated. I closed the file and looked at the others on the flash drive. There were dozens more, each one meticulously labeled. Conversations between Dad and someone named Dr. Harrison about falsifying competency evaluations. Text message screenshots showing Aunt Marie, Mom's own sister, discussing how to keep me isolated from the family. Financial records documenting years of embezzlement from trusts Mom had set up. Derek had been collecting insurance the entire time he'd been involved with our family. Then I found the video file, Insurance MP4. I clicked it, and Derek's face filled my screen. He was in what looked like a hotel room, speaking directly to the camera with that calculated confidence that made my skin crawl. "If you're watching this, Maggie, it means I've decided to disappear and you're trying to figure out your next move. Here's what you need to know. I have copies of everything. Every recording of your father, every piece of evidence you collected, but also every recording of our conversations. The ones where you manipulated me into entrapping your father. The ones where you paid me to gather evidence. The ones where you planned this whole operation. Without context, you look like a vindictive daughter who framed her own father for attempted murder. So here's my offer, $300,000 to a crypto wallet I'll provide, or all of this goes public. You have 48 hours. The video ended. I sat staring at the blank screen, my mind racing. He was right. Taken out of context, my actions could look calculated and cruel rather than defensive and necessary. I'd paid a known con artist to help entrap my father. I'd orchestrated an elaborate sting operation. Without the full story, without Mom's recordings and the decades of abuse, I could be painted as the villain. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. "Did you get my gift?" Derek's voice was casual, almost friendly. "I got it." "Good. Then you understand the situation. 300,048 hours. The crypto wallet address is in a text I'm about to send you. Don't try to trace it, don't try to find me. Just pay, and we both walk away clean. And if I don't, then I start talking to reporters. I have quite a story to tell about Margaret Reynolds and her elaborate revenge plot. You'll be famous, Maggie. Just not the way you want to be." He hung up. 2 seconds later, a text arrived with a long string of numbers and letters, the crypto wallet address. I was still staring at my phone when I heard the front door open. Emily's voice called out, "Maggie, are you home?" She appeared in my office doorway carrying grocery bags. She'd gone out for the first time in days, braving the diminishing crowd of reporters. "I got stuff to make dinner. I thought we could—" She stopped, seeing my face. "What happened?" I turned my laptop toward her and played Derek's video. I watched her face drain of color as she listened to him threaten me, watched her hands start to shake when he mentioned the recordings of our planning sessions. When it ended, she set down the grocery bags carefully, like she was afraid she might drop them. "Let me help," she said quietly. "Emily, you've been through enough. No, listen to me." She moved closer, her voice gaining strength. "I know Derek. I know how he thinks, how he operates. He's not as smart as he believes he is." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through old notes. "When we first started dating, he got drunk one night and showed me his cloud storage account. Said it was where he kept his insurance policy on everyone he'd ever worked with. He thought I was too stupid to pay attention, too focused on wedding planning to notice. But I wrote down the login information. I told myself it was just in case he ever tried to leave me just insurance of my own." She held out a piece of paper with an email address and password written in her neat handwriting. "I was going to use it if he abandoned me. I wanted leverage, wanted to make sure he couldn't just disappear. Use it now instead. See what he's really been hiding." I took the paper, looking at my sister with new eyes. "You've had this the whole time." "I'm not as helpless as everyone thinks," Emily said. "I played dumb because it was easier, because it's what everyone expected. But I'm done playing that role. Derek destroyed my life. He almost got you killed. Let's destroy him back." I opened my laptop and typed in the credentials. The account loaded and my breath caught. Folders upon folders, hundreds of files organized by victim name and date: Michelle Cortez, Shell, Jennifer Wu, Patricia Chen, and at least a dozen others I'd never heard of. A decade of crimes, all meticulously documented. At the bottom of the main folder was one more video file, Reynolds Final Leverage, DEM-P4. I clicked it. Derek appeared on screen again, but this time he looked different, harder, more serious. "If I die unexpectedly," he said, "everything in this account automatically uploads to the FBI. Don't think about hiring someone to solve your Derek problem, Maggie. I'm worth more to you alive." Emily and I looked at each other. "He's thought of everything," she whispered. "Not everything," I said slowly. "He doesn't know you gave me access, which means he doesn't know we can see his entire operation, every victim, every crime, every piece of evidence." I pulled out my phone, and I think I know exactly what to do with it. Emily and I worked through the night downloading every file from Derek's cloud account. My dining room table became command central, covered with laptops, legal pads, and printed documents organized into stacks by victim and by crime. Each folder told the same story with different names. A charming man entering someone's life, systematically isolating them from support systems, gaining access to finances, and disappearing with everything of value. Robert Chen arrived at 7 in the morning with coffee and pastries neither of us touched. He spent 3 hours reviewing the evidence, his expression growing darker with each file. Finally, he sat back and pulled off his reading glasses. "This is federal. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and potentially manslaughter in Patricia Chen's case. We're looking at charges in at least 6 states. But Emily, we need to find him. All the evidence in the world doesn't matter if we can't bring him in." "I can find him," Emily said. We both turned to look at her. She was exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, still wearing the same clothes from yesterday. But there was something new in her expression. Determination I'd never seen before. "Derek won't be able to resist contacting me. He's a narcissist. He'll want to gloat to make sure I know how clever he was. We just have to wait." She was right. 3 days later, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Miss me yet? We should talk. I think you've been hearing some things about me that aren't true. Let me explain my side. You owe me that much." Emily showed me the message, her hand steady. "He thinks I'm still the naive little girl he manipulated. He thinks I'll believe whatever story he tells me." We called Detective Santos immediately. Within 2 hours, Emily was fitted with a wire, coached on what to say, and given a script to follow. The goal was simple: get Derek to reveal his location and keep him talking long enough for law enforcement to coordinate. Emily texted back, "I've missed you so much. Maggie's been telling horrible lies about you. I don't know who to believe anymore. Can we meet? I need to see you." His response came within minutes. "I knew you'd come to your senses, but we can't meet in Oregon, too many eyes watching. I'm in Mendocino renting a place on the coast. Beautiful views, very private. You could come down for a few days. We could talk, figure things out. I still have feelings for you, Emily. I always have." The lies came so easily to him, so smoothly, that I wondered if he even recognized them as lies anymore. Emily made the trip 2 days later with Detective Santos and a small team following at a distance. I watched from Oregon via video feed as she knocked on the door of a cottage overlooking the Pacific. Derek answered wearing casual clothes and that smile that had fooled so many people, pulling Emily into a hug that made my skin crawl even through the screen. "I knew you'd understand," he said, leading her inside. "Your sister poisoned everyone against me, but you're smarter than that. You know I was only trying to help your family." Emily played her role perfectly, nodding and agreeing, asking soft questions that Derek answered with increasing confidence. He talked about his insurance policy, about the files he had on Maggie, about how he was untouchable. "Even if they find me, I'll release everything and destroy what's left of your family. But it won't come to that because you and I are going to disappear together. I have money connections, a whole new life planned out." "Can I see?" Emily asked, gesturing to his laptop. "The insurance files you mentioned. I want to understand what Maggie's so afraid of." Derek smiled, pleased by her interest, and opened his laptop. He navigated to his cloud storage, typed in his password, and waited for the page to load. Instead of his files, a message appeared. "This account has been seized by federal law enforcement." Derek's face went blank, then confused, then terrified as the implications hit him. He spun toward Emily just as the door burst open and FBI agents flooded into the cottage. "Emily, what did you do?" His voice was a mixture of disbelief and rage. She stepped back as agents moved between them. "I gave my sister your passwords, Derek. She's had access to everything for 5 days. Every victim, every crime, every piece of evidence you thought was protecting you." She pulled open her jacket, revealing the wire. "And I've been recording every word you just said." They handcuffed him, reading him his rights while he screamed about entrapment and illegal searches and lawyers. As they led him toward the door, Emily called out, "Derek, look at the laptop." On the screen was a video message I'd recorded the night before. My face appeared, and I spoke directly to the camera. "Hello, Derek. You taught me an important lesson about insurance and leverage. You were right that it's important to protect yourself. You just forgot one crucial detail: always make sure you have better insurance than your opponent. By the time you see this, every file in your cloud has been turned over to federal authorities. 15 women are ready to testify against you. And Emily, the woman you thought was too stupid to notice what you were doing, she's the one who gave us everything we needed. Enjoy prison." The video ended. Derek stopped struggling, the fight draining out of him as he realized he'd been completely outplayed. As they took him away, Emily stood in the doorway of the cottage, tears streaming down her face, but her head held high. 2 weeks after Derek's arrest, I was in my kitchen making dinner when my phone rang. Emily's friend Rachel, frantic and barely coherent. "Maggie, you need to get to the hospital right now. Emily collapsed at my place. She's in labor, but it's too early, way too early. The doctors are saying it's an emergency that both she and the baby are at risk. They need family consent for emergency procedures and they can't reach your parents." I was in my car within 60 seconds, Rachel's address already in my GPS. Of course, they couldn't reach our parents, Mom was dead, and Dad was in jail awaiting trial. I was the only family Emily had left. The 20-minute drive to the hospital felt like hours. I kept thinking about Emily's face when Derek was arrested, the strength it had taken for her to face him knowing what he'd done. I thought about the baby barely 29 weeks along fighting for life before they'd even had a chance to begin. When I burst through the emergency room doors, a doctor was already waiting for me. "Ms. Reynolds, we need your consent immediately. Your sister is hemorrhaging and the baby is in severe distress. We need to perform an emergency C-section now, but there are significant risks for both mother and child." I signed the forms with shaking hands, then sat alone in the waiting room, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in, that my sister and her baby would survive the night. They let me into the pre-op area just before they took Emily back. She was on a gurney, an IV already in her arm, her face white with fear and pain. When she saw me, she reached out with a shaking hand, and I took it, gripping hard. "Maggie," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "If something happens to me, if I don't make it, promise me you'll take care of my baby. Promise me." "You're going to be fine," I said, but my voice broke on the words. "Both of you are going to be fine. Promise me." Her grip tightened with surprising strength. "Don't let her go into the system. Don't let Dad's family take her. You raise her. You show her what real strength looks like." "I promise," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I promise, Emily. But you're going to be here to raise her yourself. You hear me? You're going to be okay." They wheeled her away, then through double doors that swung shut behind her with a finality that made my chest constrict. A nurse guided me to a surgical waiting room, offered me coffee I couldn't drink and magazines I couldn't read. I sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights and waited. The surgery took 4 hours. 4 hours of watching the clock, of jumping every time a door opened, of imagining worst-case scenarios I couldn't stop from playing in my mind. I thought about Emily as a child before Dad had twisted us into competitors. I thought about Mom's voice on those recordings protecting us the only way she knew how. I thought about all the revenge I'd carefully orchestrated over the past month, and realized that none of it mattered if Emily and her baby didn't survive this night. Finally, a doctor in surgical scrubs pushed through the doors. I stood up so fast I felt dizzy. "Ms. Reynolds." He looked exhausted, but his expression was neutral, professional. "Your sister made it through surgery. She lost a significant amount of blood, and we'll need to monitor her closely, but she's stable. The baby is alive, but she's very small, just under 2 pounds. She's in the NICU now, and the next 72 hours are critical." I started crying, then huge, gasping sobs of relief and fear and exhaustion. The doctor put a hand on my shoulder and waited until I could breathe again. "Can I see them?" "Your sister is in recovery. You can see her in about an hour. The baby, you can see her now if you'd like. But I need to prepare you. She's very fragile, connected to multiple machines. It can be overwhelming." I followed him through a maze of hallways to the NICU. He showed me how to scrub in, helped me into a sterile gown, and led me to an isolette in the corner of the unit. Inside was the tiniest human being I'd ever seen, smaller than most dolls, her skin translucent and red, her chest rising and falling with the help of a ventilator. Tubes and wires covered her small body monitors, beeping a steady rhythm around us. "She's a fighter," a nurse said softly beside me. "Came out crying, which is a very good sign at this gestation. We're cautiously optimistic." I stood there for a long time watching my niece breathe, watching her tiny fingers curl and uncurl. She looked impossibly fragile, like she might break if I breathed too hard. But she was alive. Against all odds, she was alive. Over the next 3 months, the NICU became my second home. I visited every day, sometimes twice a day, sitting beside the isolette and talking softly about her grandmother Elizabeth, about strength and survival and love. I told her about the woman she was named after, about how Mom had fought her whole life to protect her daughters, even from beyond the grave. Emily recovered slowly, both physically and emotionally. The emergency surgery had been traumatic, and the guilt of her premature labor triggered by the stress of everything with Dad and Derek weighed on her. But gradually, as the baby grew stronger, so did Emily. We fell into a routine together, taking turns at the hospital, supporting each other through the terrifying setbacks and celebrating the tiny victories. The baby gained weight, ounce by ounce. First, she came off the ventilator, then the feeding tube. Her eyes opened and began tracking movement. Her grip grew stronger. The NICU doctors called her a miracle baby, beating odds that had initially been stacked heavily against her. We didn't talk much during those months, Emily and I. But the silence between us had changed. It was no longer the hostile silence of estrangement or the awkward silence of guilt. It was the shared quiet of two people who'd survived a war together, who'd watched something precious nearly slip away, and had fought to keep it alive. 3 months after that terrifying night, a doctor told us the baby was finally strong enough to go home. She weighed almost 6 pounds, now could breathe on her own, and was feeding well. Emily stood beside the isolette, tears streaming down her face, as a nurse carefully disconnected the last of the monitoring wires. "What should we name her?" Emily asked, looking at me. I never chose a name. I kept thinking if I named her, and then we lost her. "Elizabeth," I said immediately. "After Mom." Emily nodded, then added softly, "Elizabeth Margaret. After the 2 strongest women I know." Something inside my chest cracked open at those words. I reached for my sister's hand and she took it, both of us crying as we looked at this tiny person we'd almost lost, this new beginning neither of us had expected. We were signing discharge papers when a nurse approached me holding a standard manila envelope. "Ms. Reynolds, this arrived in this morning's mail for you. Since you're listed as next of kin contact, they forwarded it here." The return address made my stomach clench: Oregon State Penitentiary. My father's handwriting, shaky but unmistakable, spelled out my name. Emily saw it and went pale. "What does he want?" "I don't know," I said, holding the envelope like it might explode. "But we don't have to deal with this today. Today is about taking Elizabeth home." But as we gathered the baby's things and prepared to leave, the envelope felt heavy in my purse, a weight I couldn't ignore. I didn't open the letter from my father for 2 weeks. It sat in a drawer in my kitchen, unopened, while Emily and I focused on bringing Elizabeth home and establishing routines with a baby who still needed careful monitoring. Every time I walked past that drawer, I felt its presence like a weight, but I couldn't bring myself to read whatever justifications or accusations he'd written. The trial began in early spring, 6 months after his arrest. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and cameras, but Robert Chen had arranged for us to enter through a side door. Emily stayed home with Elizabeth, but I went sitting in the 3rd row of the gallery with my hands folded in my lap, watching my father be led into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. He looked older. That was the first thing I noticed. Not just older, but diminished somehow, as if jail had taken something essential from him. His hair had gone completely gray, his shoulders hunched forward, his expensive suits replaced by prison-issue clothing. When he glanced back at the gallery and our eyes met, I saw something flicker across his face. Recognition, maybe regret, but he looked away before I could be sure. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They played the parking garage recording where Dad discussed hiring someone to kill me, his voice cold and businesslike as he outlined preferred methods and timelines. They presented the forged power of attorney documents showing years of financial manipulation and testimony from the doctor he'd tried to bribe into declaring me incompetent. Derek testified via video conference from federal prison describing in detail how my father had recruited him into the conspiracy. Dad's lawyers tried to argue entrapment, claiming he'd been manipulated by Derek and coerced into saying things he didn't mean. But the evidence was overwhelming and their arguments felt thin and desperate. When they called Dad to testify in his own defense, he was stiff and unconvincing, insisting he'd only been trying to protect the family assets, that his words had been taken out of context, that he'd never actually intended to hurt anyone. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the forewoman read the verdict in a steady voice, guilty on all counts. Solicitation of murder. Conspiracy to commit murder. Elder abuse. Fraud. Forgery. Attempted conservatorship abuse under false pretenses. My father's face remained expressionless, but I saw his hands clench on the defense table. Judge Patricia Huang was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for harsh sentences in family abuse cases. When she spoke, her voice carried through the courtroom with absolute authority. Mr. Reynolds, you exploited the trust of your own family for personal gain. You planned the murder of your daughter simply because she became inconvenient to your schemes. You showed no remorse, no recognition of the profound betrayal you committed against the people who should have been able to trust you most. This court finds you to be a danger to society, particularly to vulnerable family members who might fall under your influence. I sentence you to 25 years in state prison without possibility of parole for 15 years. Dad was led away in handcuffs, his face still blank, still refusing to acknowledge what he'd done. I watched him disappear through the courtroom doors and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not grief, just a strange emptiness where all my anger used to be. A week later, before he was transferred to the state penitentiary, I went to visit him in county jail. Robert had advised against it, but I needed to do this one last time. I needed to look my father in the eye and tell him exactly what he'd cost me. They brought him to a visiting room divided by thick plexiglass. We picked up phones on either side and looked at each other through the barrier. He spoke first. I gave you everything, Margaret. A home and education security. I provided for you your entire life, and this is how you repay me, by destroying your own father. I'd prepared a speech, rehearsed what I wanted to say, but looking at him now, all my planned words evaporated. Instead, I said simply, You gave me nothing but pain. You tried to kill me when I was 20 because I wouldn't co-sign your loan. You controlled Mom until she couldn't breathe. You manipulated Emily into thinking love was transactional. Everything good in my life came from Mom, not you. She gave me strength. She gave me resources. She gave me the courage to finally stop you. I'm your father, he said, his voice rising. You owe me respect, loyalty. I owed you nothing. I stood up, preparing to leave. And now you'll spend the next 25 years learning what it feels like to be powerless and controlled. Maybe then you'll understand what you did to us. He stood too, pressing his hand against the plexiglass. You'll regret this, Margaret. You'll regret destroying your family. Because when you're old and alone, you'll realize that family is all you have, and you threw it away. I looked at him one last time, this man who'd terrorized my entire life, and felt something like pity. I have family now, I said quietly. Real family. Emily and Elizabeth and the life we're building together. You're not family. You're just the man who terrorized us, and now you can't hurt anyone anymore. I hung up the phone and walked out without looking back. His voice carried through the glass, muffled but still audible, calling my name and then cursing. I kept walking. Outside the jail, the spring air felt clean and fresh. I was unlocking my car when my phone rang. Detective Santos. Maggie, I wanted to update you on Derek's case. We've identified 3 more victims willing to testify. Women he targeted between 2015 and 2018. They want to meet you to thank you for finally stopping him." She paused. "One of them says she knew your husband Robert. Her name is Karen Chen. She says it's important she talk to you about how he died." My hand froze on my car door. "What did you say?" "She knew your husband, and she says his death wasn't an accident." We met at a small cafe in Northeast Portland, a quiet place with high-backed booths that offered privacy. Detective Santos had made the introductions, explaining that these women were part of Derek's pattern victims who'd been too afraid or too ashamed to come forward until they'd heard about his arrest. Laura arrived first, a woman in her early 40s with tired eyes and a gentle manner. She was Patricia Chen's older sister, and she carried a photo of Patricia that she set on the table between us like an offering. "My sister was 36 when she met Derek," Laura said softly. "Beautiful, successful, had her whole life ahead of her. Within 18 months, he'd isolated her from our family, emptied her trust fund, and disappeared. She killed herself 3 months later. Left a note saying she couldn't live with what she'd allowed to happen, how she'd let him destroy everything our parents had built for us." Michelle came next, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who ran her own consulting business now, but had lost everything once before. "Derek took $400,000 from me," she said bluntly. "My home, my retirement savings, everything. I was too embarrassed to press charges, too ashamed to admit I'd been fooled. Spent 5 years rebuilding from nothing. When I heard he'd been arrested, I cried for 3 days straight. Not sad tears, relief. That someone had finally stopped him." Karen was last to arrive, and the moment I saw her, something clicked in my memory. She was perhaps 60, with silver-streaked hair, and Robert's same warm brown eyes. "You look like him," she said, sitting down across from me. "Robert showed me your photo once, said you were the strongest person he knew." My throat tightened. "How did you know my husband—" "We worked together briefly in 2009 consulting on a financial software project. Robert was the lead auditor. I was brought in for compliance review. That's where we both met Derek, though he was using a different name, then Derek Mason instead of Derek Matthews." She pulled out a folder, old and worn. Robert discovered irregularities in the accounts Derek was managing. Money moving in ways that didn't make sense, documentation that looked legitimate but fell apart under scrutiny. Robert confronted him privately, gave him a chance to explain. Derek laughed it off, said it was a misunderstanding, but Robert wasn't satisfied. He started digging deeper. Karen slid papers across the table, printed emails dated and time-stamped. I recognized Robert's email address, saw his careful, methodical writing style. The early emails were professional, asking Derek for clarification on transactions. Derek's responses were smooth, dismissive. But as Robert pushed harder, Derek's tone changed. "Look at this one," Karen said, pointing to an email dated March 2009. Derek's words were no longer friendly. "Robert, you're making a mistake pursuing this. Some things are better left alone. Think about your family, your wife. Accidents happen when people ask too many questions." My hands started shaking. I flipped to the next page, dated 1 week before Robert's fatal car accident. Derek's final email was brief. "Some problems solve themselves. Be careful on the road, Robert." 7 days later, Robert's car had gone off Highway 26, his brakes failing on a curve he'd driven 1,000 times before. The police report called it mechanical failure, tragic, but not suspicious. I'd accepted it, grieved it, moved on with my shattered life. But now looking at these emails, understanding flooded through me. The mechanic told me the brake lines looked like they'd been tampered with. Karen continued, her voice gentle but firm. But I had no proof it was Derek, no way to connect them. The police dismissed it as a grieving colleague seeing conspiracy where there was only coincidence. But I never forgot. And when I heard Derek had been arrested for conspiracy to murder you, I knew. He'd done this before. He'd killed Robert to keep him quiet. I couldn't breathe. The cafe around me seemed to fade, leaving only Karen's words and those emails, and the sudden understanding that my husband hadn't died in an accident. He'd been murdered because he'd tried to do the right thing, because he'd threatened to expose Derek's crimes. Laura reached across the table and took my hand. "We're not just victims," she said quietly. "We're survivors, and together we're witnesses to 15 years of crimes. Michelle and I have been collecting stories finding other women Derek targeted. There are at least a dozen more willing to testify now that he's been caught." Over the next 2 hours, we shared our stories, compiled evidence, made lists of names and dates and crimes. These women had lived in isolation, each believing she was the only one foolish enough to be taken in by Derek's charm. But together we formed something powerful, a network of survivors who could corroborate each other's experiences, who could prove Derek's crimes weren't isolated incidents, but a systematic pattern. "We need to do more than just put Derek away," Michelle said as we prepared to leave. "We need to help other women recognize predators like him before it's too late. Education resources, legal support." The idea took root immediately. A foundation may be focused on financial abuse and manipulation. A place where women could learn to protect themselves, where survivors could find help rebuilding. Something that transformed our collective trauma into protection for others. We exchanged contact information, promised to stay connected, and began planning our next steps. As I drove home that evening, I felt something I hadn't expected: purpose beyond revenge. Derek had taken so much from so many people, but we were going to make sure his crimes led to something good. A month later, I received a call from a federal prosecutor. Derek had been indicted on RICO charges, conspiracy to commit murder wire fraud across state lines. The evidence we'd provided, combined with the files from his cloud storage, painted a picture of a predator who'd operated for over a decade. Robert's case was being reopened, investigated now as a potential homicide. "We need you to testify," the prosecutor said. "Your case ties everything together, shows his pattern of eliminating threats. With your testimony and Karen's evidence, we can finally get justice for your husband." I agreed immediately. But 2 days before my scheduled testimony, the prosecutor called again, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Mrs. Reynolds, we have a situation. Derek was being transferred between facilities. There was an incident during transport. He's missing." "Missing?" My voice came out strangled. "How do you lose a federal prisoner?" "We don't know yet. Marshals are investigating. But until we find him, I need you to take precautions. He knows you were instrumental in his arrest. He knows you're testifying against him. And now he's free." The details of Derek's escape emerged slowly over the next 48 hours. He'd been in transport from the federal detention center to a courthouse for a preliminary hearing when the vehicle stopped at a rest area. One guard had gone inside while the other stayed with Derek in the van. Somehow, the investigation was still determining how Derek had gotten free of his restraints, overpowered the remaining guard, and disappeared into the surrounding woods before backup arrived. Within hours, his photo was on every news channel, every social media platform. Federal marshals set up roadblocks, checked bus stations and train depots, monitored airports. But Derek had proven himself skilled at disappearing, and with each passing day, the likelihood of finding him quickly diminished. The first threatening message came to my phone 2 days after his escape. Unknown number, text only. "You should have paid me when you had the chance. Now I'm coming for what's mine." I showed it to FBI agent Tomas Reyes, who'd been assigned to my case. Within an hour, agents were stationed outside my house, surveillance cameras installed, panic buttons placed in every room. Emily took Elizabeth to stay with her friend Rachel in Seattle, both of them using assumed names at a hotel the FBI had secured. "I'm not letting him anywhere near my daughter," Emily said as she packed her hands, shaking but her voice firm. "You stopped Dad. We'll stop Derek too." But I wasn't so certain. Dad had been predictable in his arrogance, easy to trap because he'd never believed anyone could outmaneuver him. Derek was different, smarter, more cautious, and now desperate. He had nothing left to lose, which made him infinitely more dangerous. Agent Reyes found me in my kitchen 3 days after the escape, staring out the window at the unmarked car in my driveway. "We could relocate you," he said. "Put you in protective custody until we find him." "No." I turned to face him. "I'm done hiding. I've spent 58 years making myself smaller, quieter, less visible so men like my father and Derek could do whatever they wanted. I'm finished with that. And he studied me for the long moment. Then let's use that. Let's make you visible in a way that draws him out. We crafted the plan carefully over the next 24 hours. The FBI would leak information to carefully selected sources, people Derek had known criminals he might contact for help, that I'd accessed Mom's trust fund and was moving large amounts of cash. They'd make it look like I was planning to disappear, that I was scared and acting erratically. We'd stage a visit to my bank, make it public enough that Derek would hear about it, but controlled enough that they could contain the situation when he showed up. 2 days later, I drove to First National Bank in downtown Portland, the same bank where I'd opened Mom's safety deposit box months ago. Agent Reyes was in the car behind me, a dozen more agents positioned throughout the area in unmarked vehicles and plain clothes. I felt exposed walking across the parking lot, hyper-aware of every person, every vehicle, every shadow that might hide a desperate man. I was inside the bank for 20 minutes playing my role, speaking loudly enough to be overheard about withdrawing cash for a long trip. When I emerged carrying a bank envelope that actually contained nothing but paper, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I was halfway across the parking lot when Derek appeared from between two parked cars. He looked different, thinner, unshaven, wearing clothes that were too big for him. But his eyes held the same calculating intelligence they always had. "Hello, Maggie. Going somewhere?" I stopped forcing myself not to run, trusting that the agents were exactly where they were supposed to be. "Derek, you should turn yourself in. This doesn't end well for you. It ends with me finally getting what I'm owed." He moved closer, and I saw he was holding something in his jacket pocket positioned like a weapon. "You destroyed everything. My reputation, my freedom, my future. The least you can do is compensate me for my losses." "Compensate you?" I almost laughed. "You killed my husband. You tried to help murder me. You destroyed dozens of women's lives. And you think you're owed something. FBI, don't move." Agent Reyes's voice cut through the parking lot as agents materialized from every direction. Derek spun, reaching for whatever was in his pocket, but agents tackled him before he could pull it out. It was a phone, not a weapon, though the threat had felt real enough. As they handcuffed him, Derek screamed at me, his composure finally cracking. "You destroyed my life. You took everything from me." I walked closer, looking down at him on the pavement. "No, Derek. I stopped you from destroying more lives. There's a difference." The trial happened quickly this time, the evidence overwhelming and Derek's escape attempt eliminating any sympathy a jury might have had. 40 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. The reopened investigation into Robert's death led to an additional murder charge that added life imprisonment to his sentence. At the sentencing hearing, I gave my victim impact statement, speaking not just for myself but for all the women Derek had targeted. Derek Matthews spent 15 years perfecting the art of identifying vulnerable women and systematically destroying their lives. He killed my husband for threatening to expose him. He targeted my sister as part of a scheme to steal from me. He left a trail of financial and emotional devastation across multiple states. But he also did something he didn't intend. He showed me and the other survivors that we can fight back, that we can protect each other, that we can make sure predators like him never hurt anyone again. A week after Derek's sentencing, I stood in front of cameras at a downtown Portland hotel and announced the launch of the Elizabeth Reynolds Foundation, named for my mother, and dedicated to helping women recognize and escape financial abuse. We'd provide free legal services, financial counseling, emergency funds, and education programs. The Widows Network, Laura, Michelle, Karen, and 8 others would form our advisory board. The launch had been funded partially by Mom's trust fund, but also by donations that had started arriving as soon as word spread. And then the day before the press conference, a wire transfer landed in the foundation's account, $500,000 from an anonymous donor. The accompanying note was brief. "From the widows you saved, use this to save more." I read that note aloud at the press conference, my voice breaking slightly. Because that's what this had become, not just my revenge or my justice, but something bigger. A way to transform trauma into protection, pain into purpose, survival into salvation for others who were still trapped in the same darkness I'd finally escaped. 1 year after Derek's sentencing, the Elizabeth Reynolds Foundation opened its doors in a renovated storefront in Northeast Portland. The space wasn't large, just 3 offices, a conference room, and a reception area, but it felt like a cathedral to me. Emily and I had painted the walls ourselves a soft blue that Mom would have loved and hung photos of the women we'd already helped, their faces blurred for privacy, but their smiles genuine and bright. We'd assembled a team over the months: 2 staff attorneys who worked pro bono, a financial counselor who specialized in asset recovery, and a crisis coordinator who helped women find emergency housing when they needed to leave dangerous situations immediately. The Widows Network, Laura, Michelle, Karen, and now 11 others met monthly to review cases and provide guidance based on their own experiences surviving financial predators. By our 1-year anniversary, we'd helped 47 women. Some needed legal representation to fight conservatorship abuse. Others needed help untangling their finances from controlling partners. A few just needed someone to believe them, to tell them they weren't crazy or weak or deserving of abuse. Each case was different, but the pattern was always the same: isolation, manipulation, and the systematic dismantling of a woman's financial independence. Emily had transformed over that year in ways I never could have imagined. The woman who'd once cared only about designer clothes and society weddings now spent her days counseling young women about recognizing predatory behavior. She'd started a speaker series at local colleges, standing in front of auditoriums full of students and telling her story with unflinching honesty. I watched her give a presentation at Portland State one afternoon, baby Elizabeth sleeping in a carrier on my chest. "I thought I was special," Emily told the crowd. "I thought Derek loved me for who I was, that I could change him if I just tried hard enough. But predators don't fall in love. They identify targets. They study vulnerabilities. They exploit weaknesses. I was vulnerable because I needed validation, because I'd been raised to believe my worth came from being admired. Derek saw that and used it against me." The students listened with rapt attention as Emily described the red flags she'd ignored: Derek's immediate love bombing, his subtle criticism of her family, his pressure to give him access to financial information, his isolation techniques disguised as devotion. "You can't change a predator," she concluded. "You can only recognize the patterns and escape before they destroy you." After the presentation, a line of young women waited to talk to Emily privately. I watched her listen to each one offer resources, give hugs when appropriate. She'd found her purpose in the rubble of her destroyed fairy tale, and it had made her more real, more grounded, more herself than she'd ever been as Dad's golden child. The letters started arriving within weeks of our launch. At first just a trickle, then a flood. Women from across the country wrote to thank us for exposing Derek, for creating resources, for showing them they weren't alone. Some letters were brief, just a few sentences of gratitude. Others were pages long, detailing years of abuse and manipulation that mirrored my own family's story. One letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, forwarded from a television station that had covered our story. The handwriting was shaky but determined, and the return address showed it came from Boise, Idaho. I opened it during my lunch break, sitting alone in my office. "Dear Ms. Reynolds," it began. "My name is Dorothy Chen, and I'm 62 years old. 3 months ago, my 2 sons tried to have me declared incompetent and placed in a memory care facility. They claimed I had dementia, that I couldn't manage my own affairs. The truth was, they wanted access to the house my late husband left me, worth nearly $1 million, and I'd refused to sell it. When I saw your story on the news, when I heard how your own father had tried to do the same thing to you, I realized I wasn't alone. I wasn't crazy. I was being abused. I hired a lawyer using information from your foundation's website. I fought back. The judge dismissed their petition and ordered a psychiatric evaluation which showed I'm completely competent. My sons are no longer speaking to me, but I'm safe now. I still have my home. I still have my freedom. Thank you for showing me that fighting back was possible. Thank you for showing me I wasn't alone." I read that letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face, then walked to the hardware store and bought a simple black frame. I hung Dorothy's letter on the wall behind my desk where I could see it every day. More stories followed. A woman in her 70s whose daughter-in-law had been forging checks. A widow whose financial advisor had been systematically stealing from her accounts. A young mother whose husband controlled every penny and monitored her every purchase. Each one found our foundation got help, fought back, and won. Emily and I fell into a rhythm together, a partnership built not on the toxic dynamics of our childhood, but on shared purpose and mutual respect. We had lunch together most days, took turns caring for Elizabeth, celebrated small victories, and mourned the cases where we couldn't help in time. She was no longer the golden child, and I was no longer the invisible daughter. We were just 2 women who'd survived the same war and decided to help others survive theirs. On the Foundation's 1-year anniversary, we hosted a small celebration in our office. The Widows Network came along with some of the women we'd helped and their families. Elizabeth, now 18 months old, toddled around offering cookies to everyone her grandmother's eyes and her aunt's easy charm. We cut a cake, took photos, made toasts about the work ahead. That evening, after everyone had left and I was cleaning up paper plates, Emily handed me an envelope. "This came in the mail today," she said quietly. "I almost threw it away, but I thought you should decide." The return address made my stomach clench. Oregon State Penitentiary. My father's prisoner number stamped in the corner. The envelope was thin, containing what felt like a single sheet of paper. I looked at Emily. "Have you read it?" "No, it's addressed to you." She squeezed my hand. "But I'll stay while you open it if you want." I nodded, grateful not to be alone. I tore open the envelope and pulled out a single page, my father's handwriting shaky and small, so different from the bold signature he used to wield like a weapon. I took the letter to my private office and closed the door, telling Emily I needed a moment alone. My hands were steady as I unfolded the single page, but my heart was racing. After 2 years of silence, after everything that had happened, I wasn't sure what I expected. An attack, maybe. More justifications. Certainly not what I found. "Margaret," it began, and even that felt wrong. He'd always called me Margaret when he was angry, or when he was being formal with strangers. Never in private, never with warmth. I've had 2 years to think in this cell, 23 hours a day alone with my thoughts, with what I've done, with what I became. I won't insult you by asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and I'm not entitled to your absolution just because I've finally developed something resembling a conscience. But I need you to understand how I got here, not as an excuse, but as an explanation. Perhaps it will help you understand that what I did to you wasn't about your worth. It was about my worthlessness. I had to stop reading for a moment, surprised by the self-awareness in those words. This didn't sound like the man who'd screamed at me through plexiglass that I'd destroyed the family. I was raised by a father who believed a man's value was measured in dollars and dominance. He controlled my mother the way I controlled yours. He taught me that love was leverage, that family was property, that showing vulnerability was weakness. When I started losing money in bad investments, when I couldn't maintain the image of success, I felt like I was disappearing. So I controlled harder, manipulated more, became something monstrous while telling myself I was protecting the family legacy. The handwriting wavered here, became less steady. But I wasn't protecting anything. I was protecting my pride, my ego, the lie I'd built my life around. Your mother tried to tell me for 40 years. She'd say, "John, our daughters need love, not control. I need a partner, not a master." I never listened. I convinced myself she was weak, that she needed me to make decisions for her. The truth is, she was the strongest person I've ever known, and I broke her spirit year by year until there was nothing left but fear and silence. I pressed my hand to my mouth, thinking of Mom's recordings, her frightened voice documenting abuse, so I'd have proof someday. I destroyed her. I nearly killed you twice, once with your car, once with a hired killer. I failed Emily by teaching her that love is transactional, that her value came from being admired rather than from being herself. I built an empire of pride and lost my family in its ashes. Every real thing, every true thing I threw away to chase money and control and the approval of men as empty as I was. The letter continued for another paragraph, his handwriting growing shakier. If I could go back to the moment when I first hit your mother, when I first decided that fear was an acceptable tool of control, I would choose differently. But I can't go back. I can only sit here and finally see clearly what I was too proud and too scared to see before. So I'll tell you this, Margaret, and it's the truest thing I've ever written. You are not what I made you believe you were. You are not the invisible daughter, the dutiful martyr, the lesser child. You are the strongest person I've ever known. Stronger than me by every measure that matters. You survived me. You protected your sister. You stopped me from destroying anyone else. I'm sorry I made you prove your strength this way. I'm sorry it took prison and isolation for me to finally see what your mother saw all along, that you were always the best of us, and I was always the worst. The letter ended simply. I don't expect a response. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I finally understand what I did, who I was, and who you are. Your father, John. I read it 3 times, looking for manipulation, for hidden agenda, for any sign that this was another tactic. But the handwriting was too shaky, the admissions too complete, the tone too defeated. This was a broken man who'd finally run out of places to hide from himself. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer, not in the trash but not displayed either. It existed now, this accounting of his crimes and his belated recognition of them, but I didn't know what to do with it. Emily knocked softly and entered. "Are you okay? What did he say?" I considered how to answer. He apologized. Really apologized, not the fake kind where they explain why what they did wasn't really that bad. He took responsibility. He said he finally understands what he was. Do you believe him? I don't know. Maybe. Prison changes people, or maybe it just gives them time to stop lying to themselves. I looked at my sister. He called me the strongest person he's ever known. Emily's eyes filled with tears. You are. You always have been. He asked if I understood how he got that way. His father, his upbringing, the values he was taught. Do you? Understanding isn't the same as excusing, I said carefully. I understand that he was taught toxic things about manhood and power, but thousands of men are taught those things and don't try to murder their daughters. He made choices. He chose cruelty over compassion every single time. Emily sat down across from me. Are you going to visit him? I shook my head slowly. No, not now. Maybe not ever. This letter is for him, not for me. It's him trying to die with a cleaner conscience. But I don't owe him the comfort of my presence. I don't owe him reconciliation just because he finally developed the ability to feel shame. But someday maybe, I admitted. If I ever feel like I need that closure, but it would be for me, not for him. And right now, I don't need it. I have everything I need you, Elizabeth. The foundation, the life I've built. He's just the man who used to terrorize us. He doesn't get to be more than that, just because he wrote a nice letter. 6 months passed. The foundation grew. Elizabeth learned new words daily, and Emily and I fell deeper into the rhythm of building something good from the rubble of what had been destroyed. Then one Tuesday morning my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Ms. Reynolds, this is Chaplain Morris from Oregon State Penitentiary. I'm calling about your father, John Reynolds. The voice was gentle, practiced at delivering difficult news. He's very ill. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors estimate he has perhaps 3 months, possibly less. He's asking if you would consider visiting. You're under no obligation, of course, but I thought you should know. He'd like a chance to speak with you before... well before it's too late. I thanked Chaplain Morris and hung up, sitting in silence in my office for a long time. 3 months. My father had 3 months to live, and he wanted to see me one last time. Part of me wanted to refuse to let him die alone the way he'd made Mom feel alone for 40 years. But another part, the part that sounded like Mom's voice in those old recordings, whispered that I'd regret not going. Emily found me an hour later, still sitting with my phone in my hand. I told her about the call, about the cancer, about the request. She pulled up a chair and sat across from me, Elizabeth asleep on her shoulder. "You should go," she said quietly. "I don't owe him anything." "No, you don't. But you owe yourself closure on your own terms. If you don't go, you'll always wonder what he wanted to say. You'll give him power over you even after he's gone." She shifted Elizabeth to her other shoulder. "I'll come with you. You shouldn't have to do this alone." Robert Chen said essentially the same thing when I called him that afternoon. "There's nothing he can do to hurt you anymore, Maggie. You're in complete control. You can walk out at any moment. You can refuse to engage, but at least you'll know you gave yourself the option." So 3 days later, Emily and I drove to the Oregon State Penitentiary together, Elizabeth strapped into her car seat between us. The drive took 2 hours and we barely spoke. What was there to say? We were going to say goodbye to a man who'd terrorized us, who'd nearly destroyed us, who was now dying in a prison hospital ward. The prison hospital was a separate building, smaller and more sterile than I'd imagined. We went through security-signed paperwork and were led down a hallway that smelled of disinfectant and something else. Something I recognized from Mom's final days, the smell of bodies shutting down. The guard stopped outside a door marked with a number. "He's awake but weak. Don't tire him out. You have 30 minutes. He unlocked the door and stepped aside. My father looked nothing like the man who'd been led out of that courtroom in handcuffs 2 years ago. He'd lost at least 50 pounds, his skin hanging loose on bones that seemed too prominent. His hair was completely white now, thin and wispy. An oxygen cannula snaked across his face, and monitors beeped steadily beside his bed. When he saw me walk through the door, his eyes filled with tears. "You came," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I sat in the chair beside his bed, but didn't reach for his hand, didn't offer any physical comfort. Emily stood by the door holding Elizabeth, a silent witness. "I came so you could say whatever you need to say," I told him. "Then I'm leaving and you won't see me again." He nodded slowly, accepting the terms. "Fair enough." He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering strength. "I've had a lot of time to think in here, about what I did, about what I was. The letter I sent you, I meant every word. But there are things I couldn't write, things I needed to say out loud." "Then say them." When they told me I had cancer, when they said it was terminal, my first thought was that I'd been cheated, that I deserved more time, more life. But then I realized I'd already been given more time than I deserved. "Your mother tried to leave me twice. Did you know that once when you were 15, once when Emily was 10? Both times I found her, threatened her, broke her down until she came back. If she'd succeeded, if she'd escaped, she might still be alive. She might have had 20 more years of actual life instead of existing in the prison I built around her." His voice cracked and he stopped to catch his breath. "I don't ask you to forgive me. I just need you to know that I finally understand what she tried to teach me. Love isn't possession. Family isn't control. Strength isn't domination. Real strength is what you did, standing up to me, protecting your sister, building something good from the ashes I left behind. You're everything I should have been and wasn't." I listened without speaking, watching this broken man try to make peace with the monster he'd been. When he finished, I stood up. "I hope you find peace," I said, and I meant it. Not for his sake, but because holding on to hatred was exhausting, and I was tired of carrying the weight of what he'd done. "But I can't give it to you. That's between you and whatever God you believe in." I turned toward the door where Emily was already opening it, Elizabeth starting to fuss in her arms. As I stepped through, my father's voice stopped me one last time. Margaret, wait. Please. His voice was desperate now, pleading. Tell Emily. Tell her I'm sorry I made her cruel. Tell her she was never the golden child. She was just the one I could control. I looked back at him, this dying man who'd finally learned to see what he'd done. You can tell her yourself. She's right here. I gestured to Emily, who'd been standing in the doorway the entire time. Emily stepped forward so he could see her, see the daughter he'd corrupted with preferential treatment and impossible standards. I already know, Dad, she said quietly. And I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. His face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks. He tried to say something else, but we were already leaving, walking down that antiseptic hallway and back out into the autumn sunlight. We didn't speak until we reached the car. Emily buckled Elizabeth into her seat while I stood beside the driver's door, breathing the free air, feeling the weight of 58 years finally beginning to lift. How do you feel? Emily asked as we pulled out of the parking lot. Empty, I admitted. Not sad, not relieved, just empty. Like I've been carrying something heavy for so long that now that it's gone, I don't know what to do with my hands. That's okay, Emily said. We'll figure it out together. 3 weeks later, I was at the foundation office reviewing grant applications when my phone rang. Another unfamiliar number. Ms. Reynolds, this is the Oregon Department of Corrections. I'm calling to inform you that John Reynolds, inmate number 847392, passed away this morning at 6:47 a.m. As his next of kin, you'll need to contact the state medical examiner regarding disposition of remains. I thanked them, hung up, and sat staring at my desk. My father was dead. The man who'd terrorized my childhood, who'd tried to murder me, who'd finally learned remorse only when it was too late, he was gone. I felt nothing. And somehow that felt exactly right. Emily and I made the funeral arrangements together over the phone with a funeral director who seemed relieved we wanted something simple. No viewing, no service, no announcement in the newspapers beyond the legal minimum required by the state. Just a burial at the same cemetery where Mom was laid to rest 3 years ago. He requested in his will to be buried beside your mother, the funeral director said carefully. Is that acceptable to you? Emily's face hardened. He doesn't deserve to be next to her, not after what he did. I felt the same way, but I thought about Mom's recordings, her voice saying she'd stayed to protect us. Mom would have wanted it, I said quietly. She loved him for reasons I'll never understand. We're not doing this for him. We're doing it for her memory. Emily nodded reluctantly, and we set the date for the following Saturday. Just us, Elizabeth and Chaplain Morris, who'd agreed to say a few words. The morning of the burial was gray and cold, typical Oregon autumn weather. We drove to the cemetery in silence, Elizabeth babbling happily in her car seat, oblivious to where we were going or why. The cemetery groundskeeper directed us to Mom's plot where a fresh grave had been opened beside hers. The casket was already at the gravesite Simple Pine as we'd requested. Chaplain Morris stood waiting, his Bible tucked under his arm. He greeted us warmly, then began speaking about redemption and forgiveness, about how even the most broken souls could find grace in their final moments. His words were kind but generic, the same things he probably said at every funeral. They washed over me without leaving any impression. Emily cried, not the dramatic sobbing of deep grief, but quiet tears that ran down her face while she stared at the casket. When I asked her later what she was crying for, she said she didn't know. Maybe for the father he could have been if he'd been different. Maybe for the little girl I was who thought he was perfect. Maybe just because death is sad, even when the person who died was terrible. I didn't cry. I stood holding Elizabeth's hand, watching them lower the casket into the ground beside Mom's grave, and felt only that same emptiness I'd felt when I got the call about his death. The chaplain finished his words, said a brief prayer, and then it was done. He offered his condolences and left us alone at the graveside. Emily took Elizabeth for a walk among the headstones, giving me space. I knelt in the damp grass beside Mom's headstone, running my fingers over her name. Elizabeth Ann Reynolds, beloved wife and mother, the dates of her birth and death. Nothing about how she'd suffered, how she'd protected us, how she'd been the strongest person I'd ever known, even in her silence. "I did what you asked, Mom," I whispered. "I protected myself. I protected Emily. I protected the family from him. He can't hurt anyone anymore. You can rest now." I placed the flowers I'd brought on her grave, white roses her favorite, and stood up. Dad's grave had no marker yet, just the mound of fresh earth. I didn't leave him flowers. I simply walked away. 2 weeks later, Emily and I met with the executor of Dad's will in a lawyer's office downtown. We expected nothing. He'd died in prison with no assets, no property, nothing of value. But the executor, an elderly man named Harold Chen, pulled out a folder with surprising thickness. "Your father worked in the prison library for the last 18 months of his sentence," Harold explained. "He earned a small salary, about 40 cents an hour, and had a modest pension from his years in business that couldn't be seized because of certain protections. Together, it amounts to approximately $15,000. He slid papers across the desk. "He's left it all to something called the Elizabeth Reynolds Foundation. Is that an organization you're familiar with?" Emily and I looked at each other in shock. "That's our foundation," I said. "We run it." "He knew that." Harold pulled out one more envelope. "He left instructions that this letter be given to you along with the bequest." I opened it with trembling hands. The handwriting was shaky, clearly written near the end of his life. "Margaret and Emily, use this money to help others. It's the only good thing I can do from in here. Don't put my name on it. Put your mother's name. Let something good come from the wreckage I created. This is not redemption, I know I'm beyond that. But maybe it's a start at restitution." It was signed simply, "Your father," and dated 2 weeks before he died. "He actually did something selfless," Emily said wonderingly. "I didn't think he was capable of it." "Maybe dying changes people," I said. "Or maybe he just finally ran out of people to impress and had to face himself." I looked at Harold. "We'll accept the bequest, and we'll use it exactly as he asked to help other women escape the kind of control he inflicted on our mother." A month after the burial, I drove to the storage facility where Dad had kept some belongings from before his arrest. The state had been holding his things, and now that probate was complete, I needed to clear out the unit. Emily had offered to come, but I wanted to do this alone to face whatever remained of his life without witnesses. The unit was small, just 10 by 10, and sparsely filled. Some boxes of old business records, a few pieces of furniture Emily and I had agreed to donate, and in the back corner a cardboard box labeled in his handwriting, "For Margaret, open after I'm gone." I carried it to my car and opened it in the front seat. Inside were photographs, dozens of them spanning my entire childhood. Me at age 5, missing my front teeth and grinning at the camera. Me at 10, holding a trophy from a spelling bee. Me at 13, awkward and gangly but smiling. Me at 16, before the car accident, before everything went dark. I looked like a happy child in these photos. A loved child. I had no memory of feeling that way, no memory of the moments these pictures captured. But here was evidence that once before something broke in him, or maybe in both of us, I'd been his daughter, and he'd cared enough to take these pictures to keep them all these years. I turned over the photo of 5-year-old me, the one where I was missing my front teeth. On the back, in his handwriting, fresh and recent, "I'm sorry I forgot how to love you." I sat in my car in that storage facility parking lot, holding photos of a childhood I barely remembered, and a father I'd never really known, and finally I cried. Not for the man who died in prison, but for the father and daughter we might have been in some other life, where he'd made different choices. For the little girl in these photos who didn't know yet that love could turn into control, that family could become a cage. I cried for all of it, the loss, the waste, the terrible tragedy of a man who'd had everything that mattered and had thrown it away for pride and power and the approval of people who didn't actually care about him. Then I dried my tears, put the photos back in the box, and drove home to the family I'd chosen, the life I'd built, and the future that was finally truly mine. 5 years passed like water flowing around stones, smoothing the sharp edges of everything that had come before. I turned 63 in the spring, and Emily threw me a surprise party at the Foundation's main office in Portland, now one of 3 locations we operated across Oregon and Washington. The walls were covered with photos of the women we'd helped, over 300 in 5 years, each one a story of survival and rebuilding. Emily herself had remarried 2 years ago to Marcus Chen, a high school history teacher with kind eyes and infinite patience. They had 2 children now, Elizabeth, who'd just turned 5, and little Robert, named after my late husband, who was 2 and exactly as stubborn as his namesake had been. Watching Emily with her family, seeing her be the mother she'd never had, was its own kind of healing. One evening I was at their house for dinner when Elizabeth asked if I could teach her to play piano. They'd inherited Mom's old upright when we'd finally sold our parents' house, and it sat in their living room, mostly unused. I sat down on the bench and Elizabeth climbed up beside me, her small hands hovering over the keys with reverence. I taught her the same song Mom had taught me when I was her age, a simple melody in C major. Her fingers stumbled over the notes, but she was determined, her face scrunched in concentration, exactly the way mine used to be. After half an hour of practice, she turned to me with those serious eyes that reminded me so much of Mom. "Aunt Maggie, are you happy?" The question stopped me. I thought about it carefully, wanting to give her an honest answer. "I don't know if I'm happy, sweetheart, but I know I'm free. And freedom is more important than happiness, because when you're free, you can choose happiness on your own terms. Does that make sense?" She nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but sensing the weight of the words. "I think so. Like how Mommy says she wasn't free when she was with Derek, but now she's free with Daddy Marcus." "Exactly like that," I said, pulling her close. "Your mommy is very wise." That night, I drove home to my house in Eugene, the same modest place I'd lived in through everything, though I'd renovated it in the years since. As I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, I thought about the long path that had brought me here. I thought about Mom, who'd spent 30 years secretly building me an escape route, even while she remained trapped herself. About her recordings and her hidden trust fund and her fierce, quiet love that had reached across death to save me. I thought about Emily, who'd been corrupted by favoritism and manipulation, but had found her way back to something real, something honest. About Derek rotting in federal prison, his chain of victims finally broken. About Dad buried beside the woman he'd destroyed, having learned remorse only when it was too late to matter. And I thought about myself, about the 58 years I'd spent being invisible, being the dutiful daughter, the caretaker, the one who sacrificed everything and received nothing. About the moment I'd finally said no, finally fought back, finally claimed the life that should have been mine all along. I pulled out the photograph I still carried in my wallet, the one of 5-year-old me with missing front teeth and a huge smile. That little girl who didn't know yet that families could be prisons, that love could be weaponized, that she'd spend decades learning to disappear. I looked at her innocent face and whispered, "I'm sorry it took so long, but we made it. We're okay now." The next morning I gave a workshop at a community center in Salem, teaching women to recognize financial abuse patterns and protect their assets. About 40 women attended, ranging from their 20s to their 70s, all of them carrying stories I recognized in their eyes. Afterward, a young woman approached me hesitantly. She was maybe 30, thin and nervous with the kind of exhaustion that comes from years of hypervigilance. "Mrs. Reynolds, I just wanted to thank you. I left my husband 3 days ago. He was controlling every penny I spent, checking my phone, isolating me from my family. I had to ask permission to buy groceries. Your story, the Foundation's resources, they gave me the courage to finally leave. I have nothing right now. I'm staying with a friend. I have $200 to my name, no job lined up. but I have my freedom, and you taught me that's worth everything." I embraced her, feeling her body shake with suppressed sobs. "You're going to be okay." I promised, and I meant it. "It feels impossible right now, but you're going to rebuild. You're going to be stronger than you ever imagined. And when you are, you're going to help someone else. That's how we break the cycle." She pulled back, wiping her eyes, and I saw something in her face. I recognized that determination mixed with terror, that fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, freedom was possible. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for showing me I could do this." As I drove home that afternoon, I thought about what I'd say if someone asked me to sum up everything I'd learned, everything I'd survived, everything I'd become. And I realized the answer had been forming itself for 5 years, word by word, woman by woman, act of courage by act of courage. 5 years ago, I thought my family had stolen my life. Turns out they gave me something more valuable, a reason to rebuild it. This time, I didn't pay for a wedding. I didn't pay for peace. I paid for freedom. And freedom is priceless. But unlike everything else they took from me, freedom is something you can give away infinite times and still keep. So I give it away every single day. To women who've forgotten they're allowed to fight back. To sisters who think they're too far gone to save. To daughters who believe they exist only to serve. I tell them what my mother told me, what I'm telling you. You are worth saving. You are worth fighting for. And the best revenge. It's not destruction. It's living so fully, so freely, that their chains become invisible. My name is Margaret Reynolds. And this is what freedom looks like. So that's my story. The story of how I went from being the invisible daughter, the one not even worth inviting to a wedding I'd funded, to building a life that actually belongs to me. It wasn't easy. There were nights I wanted to give up, moments when the pain felt too heavy to carry. But I kept going, and I'm so glad I did. If you're listening to this and you see yourself in my story, if you have a family member who controls you, diminishes, makes you feel invisible, I want you to know something: you are not alone. You are not crazy. You are not ungrateful or difficult or too sensitive. You are being abused, and you deserve better. The Elizabeth Reynolds Foundation is real, and there are organizations like it all over the country ready to help you. You don't have to suffer in silence the way my mother did. You don't have to wait until you're 58 to fight back the way I did. You can start today, right now, by simply acknowledging that what's happening to you is not okay. And if you're listening because you love these kinds of stories, because you find strength in hearing about people who fought back and won, then I hope my story gave you something valuable. Maybe it reminded you of your own strength. Maybe it made you think about someone in your life who needs help. Maybe it just entertained you for a few hours, and that's okay too. We all need stories that remind us the good guys can win sometimes. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you experienced financial abuse or control in your own family? Do you have a mother, sister, or daughter who's going through something similar? What part of my story resonated with you most? Was it the betrayal, the fight back, the reconciliation with Emily, or something else entirely? Your stories matter just as much as mine, and sharing them helps other women realize they're not alone. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something or taught you something or just kept you company for a while, please consider subscribing to this channel. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who might be feeling invisible in their own family. Leave a comment telling me what you thought. Did the ending satisfy you? Were there moments that surprised you? What would you have done differently if you were in my shoes? And most importantly, if you or someone you know is experiencing elder abuse, financial control, or family manipulation, please reach out for help. You deserve to live freely. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to matter. Don't wait as long as I did. Start building your freedom today. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And remember, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's living so fully, so freely that their chains become invisible. Now go out there and live your freedom. I'll be cheering for you every step of the way.